Okay. Alexander, how is your Monday?
My Monday is busy, always keeping up with the news. But of course, it's always great to be back on the Duran, doing programs, discussing things, and interacting with our viewers. But Monday is fine, and it's a beautiful day here. Very discordant with the news. As I said, I think, as I discussed last week, the mood in Britain has darkened, even if the political class hasn't quite understood that, but you can sense that. In fact, I was reading an article by David Daniel Hannan, who is a very, very conservative, pro-government, anti-Russia commentator, and he discussed how Britain is becoming poorer. And I was looking also at the latest figures in the US. Latest polling numbers, 71% of Americans think the country is going in the wrong direction. So, I mean, these are the things we have to bear in mind. I mean, there's obviously the war going on, which will be the main focus of our program today, as always. But it's happening against a darkening mood across many countries, and of course in Britain, in the United States, in Germany, as I also know. And there's growing uncertainty. And I saw, by the way, recently the polling numbers coming out of France, and Marine Le Pen's votes is now rising. It's hardening, and she's starting to catch up on Macron, and she's now, I think, conclusively established herself as the alternative to Macron, and that I'm sure is more related to, as I said, the darkening of the mood than it is to any successes on her campaign, which has been rather disorganized, in my opinion.
Well, she has to go back to the Eurosceptic policy that she had before she folded to the EU, which is what she did. She folded to the EU.
Precisely. I would stress again, I still expect Macron to win. I mean, I think he's more likely than not going to win. I'd be very surprised if he didn't win. But he's losing ground, and Le Pen is gaining. And as I said, she's now within range of him in the first round. And of course, if she gets through to the second round, as somebody pointed out in one of my live streams, I think it was Leafy Bug, she's got she's getting about 20%. The left winger Mélenchon is getting about 14%. Zemmour is getting about 11%. That's a total of about 45% of the vote in France, which is now overtly opposed to NATO, if you include hers as well. So, it's beginning to look more like a contest than it was just a short time ago. But I still expect Macron to win.
Okay, well, Macron is looking like the closest thing Europe has to a statesman at this moment, and that's quite a statement.
That's quite a statement.
Okay, so let's jump into it, Alexander. And first of all, let's say hi to everyone that is watching us on Odyssey and on Rumble and on YouTube, and our awesome chat that is taking place right now on Locals, the Duran.locals.com. Welcome to everybody who is watching us on those platforms. And let's just give a quick shout out, Alexander, to our amazing moderators. I see that Valley S is with us, and Lady Cosmica is with us, and Alan Watson is also in the house. Hello to our moderators. Thank you very much for helping us in the chat. Lady Cosmica, your font is always very interesting. I see. Good for you. It always catches the eye. So, Alexander, the title of this live stream is Phase 2 of Operations. And I didn't mention Phase 2 from who. Could be Russia, that it's Phase 2. They've said they're going to enter into Phase 2. We could be talking about Phase 2 with regards to the economic war and the sanctions. We could be talking about the U.S. is Phase 2 in these operations. We could be talking about Phase 2 in what's going on the ground in Ukraine, or with regards to the financial war. There is so much news that is breaking after 30 days of this conflict. My question to you is, can you sum up the Phase 2 of this story from all sides?
Yeah.
and from all angles, Alexander,
Yeah.
because real quick, I think that after 30 days,
Mm.
we have a very clear picture
Yeah.
as to what this is all about. A very clear
Uh,
picture. And I would also say, I would venture to say, you can correct me if I am wrong, that Ukraine is just one part of the battle of what is
Absolutely.
essentially a war. We are in a
Absolutely.
war, and
We
Ukraine is
are.
just one part of the battle. Alexander.
Absolutely. Now, I think, if I may say, that the expression phase two originates with a briefing that the Russian General Staff, General Rutskoy, its operational director, gave a few days ago, which provided full clarity about the Russian strategy and set out exactly what the Russians are doing. And by the way, can I say, fully corroborated our analysis. I must say that, because there's been so much misconceptions about this, but we always said that the focus was on the destruction of the Ukrainian army in eastern Donbass. And what basically General Rutskoy was saying, and I did a long video about this on my channel, over an hour long. But anyway, what he basically said was that the Ukrainian army in eastern Donbass has been isolated, it has been cut off from supplies, and it is being systematically destroyed, with the Russians now focusing on its destruction, on what he called the liberation of Donbass. Now, I have to say that shortly before I went on to this program today, I started to see videos of what's actually happening in Donbass, and it is harrowing. It reminded me of the films that I've seen from the First World War, from the various battles of Ypres and such places, Passchendaele, as it's sometimes called. It's absolutely shocking to see, and you see Ukraine places where the Ukrainian army was embedded, and they've been absolutely destroyed. You see Ukrainian soldiers, bodies of Ukrainian soldiers littering the ground, and you get a sense of what's actually happening in Donbass. This army, this Ukrainian army in Donbass, is being obliterated, and it is a terrible sight, and it is a total, complete abdication of political responsibility, first and foremost, obviously, by the Ukrainian government, but also by the governments of the West, and also a complete abdication of responsibility by the Western media, that this is being allowed to happen. Those troops should be told to surrender or to retreat. They should not be exposed to this hideous devastation. I mean, I have to say, I was deeply distressed by these pictures. Now, I haven't seen analogous pictures from Mariupol. I gather the situation is pretty much the same
Patrick
there.
Lancaster. I mean,
I
I
know,
don't
I
want to
know,
cut you
I
off.
know, I know,
I
I
know
know.
you know about Patrick
I
Lancaster.
I know a lot about
I'm sure
him.
you
I
know
think
about the.
he's a wonderful person. He's
Yeah,
one of the few
he's heroic.
real
He's
reporters.
heroic. He's
He's
heroic,
heroic,
no doubt about
exactly.
it.
I mean,
Um,
perhaps
did you also
exactly,
see the videos that went viral with the POWs and what
absolutely.
Patrick Lancaster shot from School 25 in Mariupol? Anyway, they
Absolutely,
just want
absolutely.
to
I
throw
mean,
that in there because those are
it is
going viral everywhere.
absolutely. I mean, it is grotesque. I mean, those things are grotesque. They're also, by the way, very much the sign, in my opinion, of the kind of incredibly cruel and brutal acts of the desperate people who are already, very violent, undertake, as they're about to, as they fear that they're about to die. But the pictures, as I said, from the other Donbass settlements further to the north, where I presume most of the soldiers that I'm seeing, all these bodies that I'm seeing, are not of people from these kind of terrible far right battalions. I mean, as I said, I found them incredibly distressing watching, and you see fields of these people, their bodies lying there, and you see the absolute destruction of settlements. As I said, it reminded me of some of the pictures I've seen from the First World War, and it gives you a sense of what is really happening in this war, and it is so remote from the nonsense that I'm reading in the Western media, and it cannot continue like this for much longer. As I said, this is phase two. It is the systematic destruction of a large army of Ukrainian troops in eastern Ukraine, Ukraine's best troops, the flower of its youth, you could say, or at least its male youth. I mean, it's like the Somme. You know, the British people will know what I'm talking about, the Battle of the Somme. It is something on that kind of scale. And when General Rutskoy was talking on Wednesday, he was giving very high casualty numbers for the numbers of people that the Ukrainians had lost. I was, in my long program, I was skeptical about those numbers. I am skeptical no longer. And I think Western governments ought to understand this. I think some governments perhaps do. Maybe the French government does, maybe the Turkish government does. But the other thing that is absolutely shocking, that was profoundly horrifying to me, and which, by the way, caused a shock across Europe, was President Biden's fantastic, grotesque, ludicrous speech in Warsaw. Now, again, I've done a program about this. I think it'll be up on my channel later, in about 2 or 3 hours exactly.
3 hours.
I mean, this is supposed to be his JFK moment, the moment when JFK went and addressed the people of Berlin after the wall had been put up and said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." And as I said, it was a heroic moment during the Cold War. It did rally the people of Germany. It also reminded me a bit of Ronald Reagan also going to Berlin, saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, bring down this wall." That was what it was supposed to be, and it was instead terrible. And it's not just been terrible on its own terms, but it's terrible in terms of the political effect it's had. Because going back to those films I saw of the situation in eastern Ukraine, it made it absolutely clear that Joe Biden is prepared to go keep this war going until the last Ukrainian. He's pursuing some kind of personal feud against Vladimir Putin. That's very much how it came across to me. He's pursuing a neocon regime change agenda. We called it, by the way, right at the start, especially when they went after the assets of the central bank. And of course, the real price for this insane plan is being paid by all those dead Ukrainian soldiers that I saw in these absolutely distressing videos. So I have to say that I was profoundly shocked. So have the chancelleries, the ministries of Europe, and of course some people in the United States too, because now we come to phase two, and phase two is the economic war. We have a war of attrition in Donbass, a war of attrition in which Ukraine's army is being obliterated, and we have an economic war of attrition because the great shock and awe exercise of destabilizing the Russian economy, provoking an uprising against Vladimir Putin, that's clearly not going to happen. But Biden is still sticking with that program, and you could sense the dismay across Europe as they realize that they've now got onto a runaway train and there is no destination, there is no final exit point in sight. And so Macron spoke out against it. The Turkish government spoke out against it. The Germans have mumbled some uncertain words, though the government there, I think, is now severely exposed. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the British government distanced itself from Biden's words. Even Liz Truss now came out and said that if there's a ceasefire, if there's an end to the conflict in Ukraine, these sanctions might be lifted. Because, of course, who are these sanctions hurting? Well, they're hurting the Russians, obviously, but the Russians have a real cause. And of course, they also have a plan on how to deal with these sanctions. But we in Europe, we in the people in the United States, they are also being hurt too, increasingly so. In fact, inflation numbers are rising. I've already said that in Britain, we are looking at the steepest fall in living standards since the 1950s, when records first started to be taken. It's going to be worse in other places in Europe. You've told me about the situation in Cyprus and in Greece. And of course, those are perhaps the more vulnerable countries. But the Chancellor of Germany, the utterly incompetent, arrogant, and dim Olaf Scholz, admitted that that Germany could face a crippling recession. The Belgian Prime Minister talked about how Europe might find itself suffering worse even than the Russians might, and that we must try and avoid all of this. Well, they've all got themselves into this thing, and now they're faced with phase two, an economic war of attrition, which Biden seems intent on pursuing, and the neocons around him seem to be intent on pursuing until they achieve the impossible result of overthrowing President Putin and his government. So that is the economic phase two. No diplomatic strategy in sight. No sign that there's any way out of this runaway train. The Russians and the Ukrainians are talking in Istanbul tomorrow. Apparently, that's been arranged at the urgent insistence of Erdogan. Erdogan tried, I think, to play something of a spoiler with Putin. He's got the Azerbaijanians to occupy a village in Nagorno-Karabakh. The Russians made it clear that was unacceptable. Those Azerbaijanian troops pulled out, but Putin and Erdogan spoke. Erdogan persuaded Putin to agree to this face-to-face meeting with the Ukrainians in Istanbul, but all the indications are that those talks for the moment are deadlocked. The only thing that can break the deadlock at the moment is if the Ukrainian leadership finally sees sense, understands that the Western cavalry is not coming to its rescue. That was what came out very clearly out of that string of meetings in Europe last week, the G7, the EU Council meeting, the NATO meeting. Zelensky has said that he's been disappointed by the outcome of all those meetings. But I don't think that they've yet grasped the enormity, the utter horror of what is happening in eastern Ukraine. And my very, very great worry is that some of them don't care, and some of them are fanatical enough to sacrifice the entire flower of the youth, of the male youth of Ukraine, on this impossible project. And in the future, Ukrainians, I am sure, will never forgive them for doing it.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're ready to sacrifice all of Ukraine for this project, for this regime change project. Regime change against Russia, and then regime change against China. That's the plan. Biden said as much. And after watching your video, which will be up about 3 hours from now, at first I thought it was a gaffe, and I did a video the day before, and I said that this is probably a gaffe. Biden probably heard people planning about this, about regime change, and then he blurted it out during his speech. But I've changed my mind after listening to your video. There is no doubt that this was written in that speech, and this was positioned to be Biden's great war cry, his rallying cry to the entire world that Russia must be destroyed. And it just didn't turn out like that.
No, they catastrophically misjudged it. They misjudged it even within their own administration. It's clear again that just as that decision to impose the sanctions on the Russian central bank, most of the American government, the Federal Reserve Board, the Treasury, were not consulted about it. It was all decided by a small group of neocon staffers in the White House. So this speech was clearly prepared by the same tight group of people who are driving the policy, who control the president, because he basically does whatever he's told to do, and they don't seem to pay any attention to
this Tiger team. You mean they're called like the Tiger team or something like that? Yeah, that's what they're called.
Absolutely, that is exactly right.
Yeah. Sullivan said in a statement a couple of days ago that the U.S. is going all in. He pretty much said it. This is going to be a long war, and the U.S. is going to do whatever it takes to break Russia's back. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the statement coming out of Sullivan. So, I mean, the U.S. is going all in. They're going all in to destroy Russia. Do you think that the Russians understand this? Do you think that the Chinese understand this?
Well, of course.
What do you also make about the announcement with the March 31st deadline for ruble payments of energy? Is this the first big retaliation from Russia?
It is the first big retaliation from Russia, and of course the Russians understand it, and of course the Chinese understand it. You only have to go to their media to see that they understand it. They've understood it right from the outset. In fact, looking back at those intense diplomatic exchanges that happened in the run-up to the war, it's now become absolutely clear that this was all about the preparations for this. This was that this was all building up to this crisis, with the Russians at all points understanding that this was the position that they found themselves in. That the United States, let's not say the United States, let's say the neocons in the United States, this group of powerful people who have managed to gain control of the US government, that this is their plan. They're going for broke, because that's what they're also doing, by the way. I mean, this is their last desperate throw to stop the collapse of the globalist system, or at least the system, the kind of neocon project that they've been dedicated to ever since the Soviet Union collapsed 30 years ago. So this is what this is all about. The Russians understand it fully, and we've got to understand that this decision on the ruble payments is their first retaliation, because now, of course, the Europeans are in a very difficult position. Do they stop receiving Russian gas, or do they pay in rubles? Now, I think they're going to pay in rubles. I don't think they have any real option. They still don't have anywhere near enough gas in their reserve.
Drink some water. Drink some water, Alexander. Drink some water. Take a breath. This is important stuff. Everyone's listening to you. This is important stuff. Take a breath.
I think they've no option. After all, the German Chancellor himself said that without Russian gas, I mean, they're basically going to face an appalling recession. There's no facilities at the moment. There's nowhere near enough facilities at the moment to import liquefied natural gas. And by the way, I was looking at the numbers the other day, and I mean, I'm not, an energy specialist, but I read that Europe consumes in any one year something like 500 billion cubic meters of natural gas. This deal that Ursula von der Leyen and Biden agreed to the other day, last Monday, which was giving, a huge amount of publicity around it, was 15 billion. I mean, it's a drop. It's a bit more than a drop. It's a bucket in an ocean of gas that Europe needs. Now, of course, Europe doesn't import all of that gas from Russia. It only imports about 40% of it, but the 60% that it either imports from countries like Algeria or produces itself in the North Sea, it's just not enough to make up the numbers, and nowhere close. So I think they're going to have to grind their teeth and pay in rubles. And I was reading the comments of the Belgian Prime Minister, and he said that if the contracts have to be renegotiated, then the price might as well be renegotiated also, which seemed to me a first step towards admitting that they're just going to have to pay for that natural gas in rubles after all. And of course, what does that do? It internationalizes the ruble. It doesn't just support the ruble, which of course it does, but it internationalizes it. And who knows, might be possible over time that more and more countries will start to insist on payments in other currencies than the dollar and the euro for exports. So it's already a difficult thing for the Western powers to accept. You can see, by the way, that the Western powers are very nervous and stressed about this decision, which they clearly hadn't expected, and we'll see what they do.
Yeah, and this is just with regards to gas. Russia hasn't carried this over with the ruble to oil, to wheat, to potash, to fertilizer, to metals, to all the other things. They haven't carried over this ruble payment requirement. This is just one commodity, one resource.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can I just also point out something? Of course, if Russian exports are paid for in rubles, if people buy goods from Russia in rubles, then the United States loses track, and the European Union lose track of the payment structures, because they can keep an eye on trade flows if they're carried out in dollars, because the dollar is a US currency. They can keep track of euro trade flows as well, because obviously, we're talking about a Euro Atlantic system. But if we have trade flows in rubles, presumably going outside the SWIFT interbank messaging system, because of course the Russians have their own messaging system, and of course that's now becoming connected to the Chinese, then the whole financial structure, the whole financial architecture that underpinned globalization starts to crack and break down.
God, the Biden White House, they really messed this up. And we've been doing a lot of shows about the power vacuum in the Biden White House, and we've talked a lot about how you have the Clinton faction, you have the Obama faction, you have the neoliberals, you have the neocons, and Gonzalo Lira did a really good show where he did a deep dive into Newland, Dmitry Yarosh, and all of these characters who appear to be driving this bus off the cliff for the United States. So they're willing to destroy the United States, to destroy the U.S. economy, in order to wage this war against Russia. Why is the European Union going along with this? What kind of stupidity is this from the EU officials and from each separate government of the European Union? Viktor Orban gets it. He came out with a statement over the weekend. He said, "We are not getting involved in this. This is not our fight. We're not going to get involved." But every other country, it appears, every other country has signed up to this disaster. Why are they following Biden and Newland and these neocons? What is wrong with these people?
Well, I mean, it's 50 years of the reconstituted EU that was basically recreated in the 1970s from being a free trade zone and a regulatory body into this kind of proto-super state that we've seen. So you have an EU centre that is completely ideological. And as I've said many, many times, it has destroyed national politics in its member states. So the people who run national politics in member states, including states like Germany, France to some extent, Spain, undoubtedly, Italy, are no longer political leaders in the old sense of the word. They are functionaries. And as functionaries, they follow the instructions from Brussels. And what they've been very, very good at, very skilled at, is freezing out anybody from the from the margins who might criticize these policies. It is a direct product of this prison that the Europeans have forged to themselves in the form of the European Union. And the more it continues along these lines, the more disastrous it will become, because the more disconnected it will be from the political, economic, and social life of the people it governs.
Yeah. Brexit has been effectively cancelled.
Absolutely.
Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Australia is running into all kinds of troubling rhetoric with regards to China.
Yeah.
New Zealand is sending consultants in order to help Zelensky and Ukraine fight this war in order to escalate. The collective West is going all in on this.
Yeah,
all in.
But
how do we get them to roll this back? How does this roll back? Is it
I
possible?
don't know that it can do.
We're heading towards World War III. There's no.
Yeah, well, I hope not. I'm not sure how we get it to roll back. I mean, my own sense is that I think that they will pull back from World War III. I think that this is something that even the most hardline European governments, the British, for example, would simply not want to go there, because they know what consequences would be. But I don't see how they can get off this runaway train. What happened over the weekend with Biden's speech is that it finally dawned on them that they are on a runaway train, that this is heading towards some kind of crash. And I think that they are desperately looking for some way out, but they have no real plan. They have no real strategy. There's no consensus about lifting sanctions. It's very difficult once you impose sanctions to get them lifted. And perhaps the only thing that could possibly turn things round is if the Ukrainian government does what I said at the beginning, if it actually finally capitulates. But of course, the neocons will work overtime to ensure that doesn't happen.
But who? Okay, let's focus on if the Ukraine government capitulates. Who are you negotiating with? We all know Zelensky is an actor. He's a puppet. He is reading a script. I think you have to. What is your saying? You have to rub two brain cells together if you actually think that Zelensky is calling the shots. No one even knows where Zelensky is. I've heard that he is in Ukraine. Some people say they have very good sources saying he's in Ukraine, and he's being held hostage. I've heard he's in Poland. I've heard he's in Lviv. No one even knows where this guy is, but there's no doubt that he is. This is theatrics. He is getting on a sound stage. He has his green screen, and he's pushing for more and more escalation. Just yesterday, he said, that the West, they're cowards. I mean, he is egging the entire world on towards a World War III nuclear conflict. Why in God's name are people listening to this guy? Why are they buying into this? And if you're Russia, who do you negotiate with? If you're, if you're Putin, who are you talking to? Do they know that the U.S. and the Newlands and these people are behind this? I mean, they must know.
Oh yeah, of course they did. They said so.
Because
Lavrov and Peskov and people like that.
He's a character. He's a character in a movie. Zelensky. He's not real.
Exactly, it's not real. I mean, they've already said that. No, I mean, when I said that the only way out would be, as I said, a capitulation by Ukraine. At least, you don't call it a capitulation, a recognition of reality.
But that's a capitulation from the neocons.
I know you're not dealing with real people, but I didn't say that with any great expectation that was what was going to happen. I don't believe that is what is going to happen. I think, on the contrary, that what we're going to see is a emergence of the two great blocs, which is now, it seems to me, baked in the cake, defeat in Ukraine, and a prolonged period of economic crisis in the West, as well as parts of the East. But, the East, I suspect, is better organized to deal with that. So I think that's what's going to happen. Now, in the West, let's just go back a couple of 30 years to what happened at the end of the Cold War. We saw a period when inflation fell and became very subdued. Partly that was because of the things that Paul Volcker did in the United States. I mean, he brought monetary policy under control there, and that was an extremely tough decisions that he had to make. But also, and it's absolutely essential to understand this, a large part of the fall in inflation was the release of raw materials from Russia, these vast quantities of oil, gas, coal, food, all of that pouring out of metals, all of that pouring out of Russia. Those natural resources helped to damp inflation down. And of course, the other thing was that massive export machine, which was China, pouring out goods at cheap prices, also kept inflation down. Now, the latter, and I absolutely accept this, at the price of hollowing out the US industrial economy. Well, I think that those days are finished. They're ending. I think before very long, we're going to see both Russian natural resources essentially withdrawn from the West, and with the way in which the neocons are clearly now on an escalator of sanctioning China as well. We did a program about that a short time ago. Then I think we're going to start to see structural inflation in the West, just as we saw in the 1970s and early 1980s. So that's where we're heading. Structural inflation, which of course means lowered living standards, and lowered living standards alongside stagflation situations. In other words, permanent economic recession, permanent lowered living standards, all in conditions of a renewed Cold War, Over what? What exactly is this Cold War being waged over? I mean, that is the other thing I simply don't understand. I mean, there was some kind of ideological point to the first Cold War. I mean, it was capitalism versus communism. It was the free world versus the Soviet world and all that. But this, what exactly are we fighting this time? We're fighting ourselves.
Well, it's a hatred for Russia
It's a
by a
hatred for
small
Russia.
group,
Small
a
group of
very
people.
small group. And we were talking about this
Yeah,
after we did a video last
yeah,
week, and you
yeah.
brought the point to me. You said, Alex, this is the people that are running this show
Mm,
is a small group of people,
yeah.
and you said they may not even number a
1,000.
thousand. They may
Yeah,
not even number 1,000,
yeah.
but it's a small group of people that are
Mm.
driving the entire world, and especially the collective West. They're driving
Yeah,
it over the freaking cliff. Period.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
in order to stop this runaway train would require
Mm,
Newland, Sullivan, all of these people, Blinken, all these
mm,
people running the show.
mm.
They would have to admit that it's over and that Russia
Yeah.
has won. They will never,
No, I don't.
ever,
No.
ever admit
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
ever. So we're going to head towards a smash.
We're going to head
Period.
towards a
It's the only
smash.
direction we can head towards. And do you think that these neocons, they've got Biden by the short hairs
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're telling Biden, you know what, if you don't go all the way, Joe, if you don't go all the way, Mr. President, then all this stuff about Meta Beata and Hunter and all of these things are
Mm.
also going to be exposed. All of it
And
is going to surface. I'm starting to think that they're also the ones that are
yeah,
saying to Biden, you need to push. And you need to push for us to win and for us to have that regime change in
yeah,
Russia. Because if you don't push, and if Russia does manage to win this war, then everything about you and your son and all the other
yeah,
officials in the United States, from Kerry to Pelosi to Romney, all of their dirt is going to surface.
yeah. I agree with that. The only thing that can change this, and I don't like to use the word regime change, but there needs to be a fundamental change of power in Washington. Now, that's the only place in the West where this runaway train can be stopped. You have to look again to the United States. We always said, both of us always said throughout Russiagate, what a massively consequential election 2020 would prove to be, and how disastrous it would be for the United States if the wrong side won. Well, the wrong side did win, and we're now seeing the consequences. What now has to happen, the best hope that we have to stop this runaway train, is for the right side to get organized and to win that election back, to win power back. But that's not going to be easy at all, even if the midterms, even if the Democrats get smashed in the midterms. I mean, as we've seen, these 1,000 or so people are now deeply embedded in the power structures. And even if the president changes, even if the administration changes, they're going to still be working to keep this project that they have on the road.
All right. What do you think phase 2 on the ground in the conflict in Ukraine is going to mean for Russia? Where do you think they're aiming towards in phase 2 of the special military operation? The media in the West is saying, like Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal, they're running the narrative that the Russians have been stopped in Kiev.
Yeah.
They're even going as far as saying that Ukraine is mounting an effective counteroffensive and they're driving the Russians back.
Yeah.
And because Russia has suffered such an outright defeat
Yeah.
in Kiev, and they weren't
Yeah.
able to enter the city and to
Yeah.
cut the head off the snake, in other words, to get rid of Zelensky
Yeah.
and to stop the war there and to win the war there, that
Yeah.
they've now retreated back into the east. The Russians, of course, have a different narrative, but
Yeah.
where do you see things on the
I
ground?
mean, it's absolute nonsense. And I mean, all you need to do is to go back and follow our old programs and videos. And we made the point right at the outset. I think it was on the second day, that the very fact that the Russians were prepared to negotiate with the Ukrainian government, which they agreed to do, said they would do on the second day, indicated that they were not preparing to storm Kiev. By the way, there was a BBC journalist who went to the front lines around Kiev. And he obviously was clearly under instructions from his editors to support the claim about, the great Ukrainian counteroffensive. But if you read his report carefully, it's quite clear from his report that in the places which he went to, which is a town called Irpin, which is near Kiev, Ukraine's position, the Ukrainian military's position, has actually deteriorated over the last 3 weeks since he was last there. So, I mean, the Russians have explained very clearly that they've not got a plan to storm these cities. Their focus, we've been saying this in program after program, is the destruction of the Ukrainian army in Donbass. This has been true right from the first day. We've been saying it, in effect, from the first day. If you look at Russian statements from the first day, that's essentially what they've been saying. It is distraction and misrepresentation to claim otherwise. Now, in terms of what the Russians are going to do over phase 2, they are doing it. They are grinding down and destroying Ukraine's best army in Donbass. It's being obliterated, as I said, at a terrifying price to the Ukrainians. Now, once that army is destroyed, which will be the conclusion of phase 2, well, I don't know what phase 3 plan the Russians have, but the Russian General Staff, after that briefing, which they gave, I think, either on Wednesday or Thursday, they seem to leave open the possibility that at that point they could start to make serious moves against some of these cities that have been blocked and encircled. I mean, I'm not going to try and guess what their plan is going to be, but unless Ukraine comes to terms, the point will come where the Russians will simply dictate terms or impose them on a Ukraine that no longer has a government or a military capable of resisting them. And, that may take a couple of weeks, but that, to be very clear, in military terms, is where we're heading. As for what the Russians are doing in terms of their domestic economy, well, again, you only have to follow Russian statements. They seem very confident that they're going to take a hit economically, but that their economy is big enough, diverse enough, resilient enough, productive enough to absorb the damage. And they seem to expect a 1 to 2 year recession. So, and then they expect that industrial output will increase as the products of all these Western companies that have pulled out are replaced by Russian ones, or to some extent, no doubt, by Chinese and other ones. So that's what their plan is. And I have to say, it looks a lot more realistic to me than anything we're getting from the West, where I don't frankly see any sort of plan at all. How can you talk about a plan where Robert Habeck, the German economics minister, goes to Qatar, comes away saying that he's got a long-term deal with Qatar for more liquefied natural gas? Turns out that Qatar knows absolutely nothing about it. They've now issued a statement saying that they absolutely cannot replace Russia's natural gas, and this is never something that they even talked about. So Habeck was just talking nonsense. Or Ursula von der Leyen meeting Biden and saying, we've got this great deal for 15 billion cubic meters more of natural gas from the United States. And as I said, that's a bucket in the ocean of the natural gas that you need. And production of natural gas in Europe is falling. So they've got no plan.
Yeah, the Greek government was coming out with statements over the weekend that that the EU's plan is for more solidarity, that the EU is going to pool their resources together, and they're going to create this big buying block, and they're going to exert pressure on natural gas providers and countries that are selling natural gas or oil in order to drive the price down. And I just thought to myself, how exactly is this one block, this big block known as the EU, that they're going to make their purchases as one united block? How are they going to drive the price lower? In what way are you going to do that? Are you going to make the boats go faster? Are you going to make the LNG plants get built quicker? Instead of taking 10 years, is this big block going to exert pressure so that these LNG plants are built within
Yeah.
within 6 months. How
Mm.
exactly is this going to help the situation? And that's their plan. In other words, more EU is how they're going to solve their energy problem. That is not a
Yep.
plan.
It's
It's
not a
not a plan
plan,
at
it's
all.
ideology. It is an ideological response that the bureaucracy in Brussels has to every problem. And what is unbelievable, as I said, is that these functionaries who pretend to be the prime ministers of Greece, the chancellor of Germany, the prime minister of Spain, the prime minister of Italy, they go along with it, even though, as you absolutely rightly say, it is not a plan. It's just it's an act. It's a piece of theatre, you could say. Again, it doesn't produce any more gas. It doesn't result, as you said, in the ships being built faster or the ships going faster. It doesn't affect the market, gas markets. And besides, and this is a thing which perhaps is worth pointing out, it is a massive interference in the operations of the free market. Now, I'm not somebody who is, a market fanatic, but gas contracts historically are negotiated by companies. It's companies buy the gas, companies sell the gas. That's the way the structure of the industry has worked up to now. It's, by the way, a point that the Qataris made, that Robert Habeck can come along and say whatever he likes to the Qataris, but it's countries like Uniper and countries, European companies that the Qataris up to now have dealt with. Now they're going to get a whole new group of negotiators, presumably from the European Union. And of course, the Qataris are going to ask them, do you represent the industry or not? And are you telling us that your industry, your natural gas industry, is essentially nationalized? Except, of course, it won't be nationalized because the EU isn't a nation. But it will be a kind of state. I mean, but that's its approach, its response to every problem.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly right. The EU, though, thinks they're a nation, and
Yeah.
they think they're a state.
Mm.
And there is the really big problem. Why is the EU doing this for a country that is not in the EU? How are the EU leaders going to explain to their people, to their citizens? Right now, their citizens are they've got the blue and yellow flags on their profiles, and they're all gung ho about taking out Putin, and they've bought into the propaganda. I believe Robert Barnes said it best: they're clapping like seals right now. But how do you explain this to them in 6 months or a year? That all of this that they're going to go through, is for a country, once again, that is not in the EU. And for me, I don't care what side you're on. I don't care if you're pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine, anti-Putin, you hate Putin. I don't care. If you're an EU citizen at this moment in time, you have to ask yourself a very simple question. Why am I going to do this to my country, to myself, to my family, for another country that is not in the European Union? They're not in the EU.
No.
They're not a candidate to enter the EU.
No.
I mean, they're nothing close to the EU. They're as much in the EU as Malaysia is in the EU.
Mongolia is. I mean,
there's nothing remotely close to them with regards to the European Union. So how are they going to explain this to their citizens when the I hate Putin and the Putin is the next HITLR wears off, when all of that gung-ho attitude wears off, and you get the gas bill and the electric bill, and you have to pay 20 euros for a loaf of bread?
Well, the short answer is they're not going to explain it. I mean, because that's not what they do. They never explain their decisions. They just smear everybody who criticizes them. That's invariably what they do. And, they do all the usual things, like, with that happened with that Austrian opposition leader. They set up an event with a actress who's pretending to be the niece of Russian oligarch or something like that. That's how politics is conducted. Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Right,
well,
right.
It's the freedom
Ibiza.
part, whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is how politics increasingly is being conducted in the EU now. And that's what they're going to do. It's going to become ever less democratic, ever more authoritarian, ever more restrictive. Look at how they moved immediately to ban all Russian media sites, something that never happened during the Cold War, by the way, but they've done it this time. So that's the slide we're heading towards. Ever more control, ever more restrictions, ever more surveillance, ever greater, more difficulty to set out your positions opposing this kind of thing. And of course, the harder things become for people, the more vehement the propaganda becomes, and the more difficult life will become. Can I just make a good rule of thumb between propaganda and information? I mean, we explain things. We here on the Duran, we're all about information. We explain things. We provide our opinions. We engage in analysis. We listen to what other people say. We try to explain things. Now, propaganda doesn't explain things. That's the fundamental difference. It doesn't provide you with the reasons why things are as they are. What it does instead is it labels, it caricatures. It says, so-and-so is evil, so-and-so is bad, so-and-so is corrupt. That's how it operates. And of course, it's wearing, it's exhausting, it's mendacious, it's misleading. For a while, it works.
1 sec. I have to put someone in a timeout on the chat for YouTube because he was annoying me. He kept on saying some stupid stuff. Yeah, like that. Like some people in the chat, they smear, but they don't want to get into a constructive discussion of things because they know they will lose. The Central Bank of Ukraine, 99.2% of all the funds to fund the war, of all the money to fund the war, has been depleted. No money, no fuel, no equipment, no ammunition, no money.
Yeah. IMF has said that Ukraine's GDP has contracted by 2/3. Look, it is irrational. It is immoral to continue this war. I mean, I can't put it more simply than that. Can I just say there's a famous incident from the Second World War, which happened, I think, in July 1944, after the Allies landed in Normandy. And there was the German general who was, commanding the forces in Normandy, and he was talking to headquarters in Germany, and the officer at headquarters said, what do we do? What do we do? And the general, who was in actual command, he said, make peace, you idiot. What else can you do? Well, that's what we should be doing. That's what we should be working towards. And that's what the advice should be to Ukraine. Make peace, you idiots. What else can you do? I'm sorry to use that very strong language. I don't mean to suggest all of the people in Ukraine are idiots, but the leaders of Ukraine, whatever you may think of them as human beings, whatever they've done, they are now responsible for Ukraine and for its people. And they should make peace. They should not go to Istanbul, as they're saying that they're going to do, and make all the same points that they've already made, engage the Russians in these, incredibly complicated discussions where the Ukrainians appear to concede one thing and then take it back the following day, engage in all this chaotic negotiation. This isn't the way you lead your country.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The problem with all of this is that there are no leaders in Ukraine.
No, exactly.
The country from 2014, after the Obama EU coup, the coup led by Obama and Nuland and Payet and the European Union. We can't forget the European Union. I always forget that guy's name from Poland who's married to Applebaum.
Sikorski, Radek Sikorski.
Yes, all of these people, McCain, all these people, after the coup that they initiated, from that moment on, Ukraine has not had a leader. They haven't had a president, whether you call him Yatsenyuk or Poroshenko or Zelensky. Ukraine has been run from the outside, And so I completely agree with you. If there was a real leader in Ukraine who really cared about the people, he could hate Russia too. This leader in Ukraine could hate Russia. He could have said, you know what, we're going to fight the Russians and we're going to try to defend our country. But at this moment in time, if there was a real leader, that leader would have said, it's over.
Yeah.
It's over. I need to surrender. I need to make peace in order to save whatever is left of the country. But the problem is that you don't have anyone running Ukraine that's from Ukraine or cares about Ukraine, or that's even, for all we know, that's even in Ukraine. We don't. There's no one. It's being run completely from the outside, and Ukraine is just, for them, it's meaningless. It is about destabilizing Russia. Ukraine is just a prop for them. It's a prop.
Absolutely correct. I mean, let's just quickly, whilst we're on this topic, ask ourselves, what are the Russians asking? They're asking neutrality. Ukraine should be neutral. Well, even the Ukrainians now accept that the country's never going to join NATO. So what are they being asked to surrender there? Nothing that they actually have or are ever likely to have. They're never going to join NATO, so they might as well accept that and agree to the fact that Ukraine remains neutral. They've been asked to demilitarize, in other words, to reduce the size of their army. Well, that army is being destroyed even as we're talking. So better, it seems to me, to agree to reduce it to some sort of manageable level than try and maintain this huge army, which they had, which, as we see, has not managed to defend Ukraine. It's just been destroyed with all the young people in it. The third is about, the political cleansing of Ukraine, of these awful people, these awful forces. Well, no government in Europe should have any difficulty in agreeing those terms. You might want to discuss the details. You might want to limit it so that it doesn't take in people who are just conservatives. We've seen how that can happen. But I'm sure the Russians would probably want to negotiate about this. And also accept loss of Donbass and Crimea. They're lost anyway. So, they're not being asked to concede anything fundamental that they aren't already losing or haven't already lost. Now, of course, in a month's time, it might be different. At that point, with Donbass fully secure, with the Ukrainian army in eastern Ukraine completely destroyed, if it takes that long, well, of course, at that point, the Russians might start demanding an awful lot more, and more still if it continues. The best thing to do is to come to terms now. Now, I'm not the only person who's told the Ukrainians to do that. The Israeli Prime Minister Bennett, has been apparently telling them the same thing.
Yeah, and Erdogan is trying to
I'm
figure
sure
it out.
Erdogan is
Turkey's in a difficult position as well.
He's also apparently trying to tell them the same thing.
And I also think they're trying to open up a second front, the neocons. I mean, we saw what was happening with Azerbaijan. I'm not saying it's directly related, but we see that there's troubles now brewing up in Nagorno-Karabakh. We've heard statements about Georgia doing something, and Georgia said, we don't want to get involved.
Absolutely.
We don't want in on this, but they're prodding and they're trying to find soft spots and weak points in order to open up a second front against Russia. This is just
indeed, and in fact, the stance of Georgia and Moldova is very indicative, and it shows again the ultimate failure, it seems to me, of the neocon project, because what is clearly happening is that Georgia is now in the process of reconsidering its geopolitical allegiances, because the neocons and the Ukrainians have been trying to prod Georgia into launching an attack in the Caucasus. The Georgians have said emphatically, no, we're in no position to fight the Russians. This is a crazy idea. We're not doing it. And I think they must be reassessing their position. And I think that when all this is over, you'll see Georgia and Moldova, which has taken a very similar stance, saying that we're going to have to find some means of coming to terms with the Russians. And Moldova, of course, after an enormous effort, has now had a pro-EU government installed. But clearly, even that government is not prepared to commit suicide for this kind of project.
Right. My final question, and then we'll go to reading. We have a lot of good questions, Alexander, by the way, and we'll get to those questions as well, which is all related to this topic. But looking at it from the Russian side of things, why should Russia stop? If you're Russia, if you're Putin, if you're the Kremlin, you've seen over the last 2 decades what regime change has meant for other countries. You saw what they did to Gaddafi on video. what they did to Gaddafi, who dared to say that he would like to explore. I believe he called it an African dinar.
Yeah.
I believe that's what he called it, or an
Yeah.
African gold dinar. Correct
That's
me in
right.
the chat if I'm
That's
wrong.
right. Yeah.
You saw what they did to him. Horrific what they did to him because he dared to explore that option. If you're the Kremlin and you've seen them go after Russian musicians, conductors, athletes, cats, dogs, and I'm not exaggerating either, the hatred towards Russia, the companies that have gone after Russians, the Western companies that have gone after Russians or have pulled out from Russia. You've seen the rhetoric, you've seen the hate. If you are Russia, if you're the Kremlin, why do you look for a ceasefire? Why do you want a ceasefire? Why don't you say, you know what? They want all-out war. This is existential for us.
Yeah.
We're going to give them all-out war. And if you're China, you say, okay, now they're starting with us.
Yeah.
They're starting the same pattern with us. Well, we've got your back.
Yeah.
And we're going to go all out. If you're India, you say, they're going after Russia. They're going after China. They're pressuring us and they're putting ultimatums on us and they're giving us the same rhetoric. Well, we're going to figure out mechanisms to trade with Russia, which they're doing in rubles. And you say, you know, I'm going to start leaning towards the China-Russia side of things because sooner or later they're going to come after me.
Exactly.
I mean,
well, exactly what they've been saying. That's exactly.
You know, why don't you go after the EU and the US and Canada and Australia and say, you know, you want to destroy us? Well, we're going to go all in with you as well, and then you get just pure escalation.
Yeah,
and this is what's worrying.
Well, it is extremely worrying, and I'm very much afraid that that's exactly where we're going. Because I think at the beginning, the Kremlin pursued publicly very moderate objectives. I think because they realized that if they went all in and, you know, aimed to destroy Ukraine, well, that would have hardened international opposition. They wanted to keep as much international support as possible. And of course, they also wanted to keep public support in Russia strong. So they said, you know, we're going in for Donbass, we're going to protect Donbass, we're going to end what they call the genocide there. That's what they said they would do. So they started with very, very moderate positions. I think that as they sense that international opinion is hardening behind them, which it is, by the way, and this speech by Biden's in Warsaw will have hardened international opinion behind the Russians as well, because of course it showed to the world what US policy was. Well, at that point, the Russians will start to harden their stance. And of course, there's a very, very famous speech that Stalin gave during the Second World War. And he said, if the Germans want a war of annihilation, then they have got one. And we know how that ended. So, I mean, you know, that is a speech, by the way, that many Russians remember. It's, you know, repeated in schools. It's not impossible that we could see it resurface, that kind of sentiment in Russia today. And I agree, from the Kremlin's point of view, I am sure that these discussions are taking place there. They're saying, look, why stop with Donbass? What do we gain by stopping at Donbass? Okay, these are our people. We've protected them. But given that the Western powers are clearly out to destroy us, to bring us back to where we were in the 90s, and even worse, perhaps, to break us up entirely, well, let's press on. Let's finish this Ukraine problem once and for all. Let's reabsorb Ukraine in some form. Maybe, you know, we'll keep some kind of structure, some state there, but it'll be one that we will ensure is friendly to ourselves. Why don't we go ahead and finish this once and for all? Eventually, the Western powers will have to come to terms, however long it takes. We can endure any siege. In the meantime, our history shows that not only can we endure a siege, but we can actually do quite well when we are under siege. And of course, we have most of the world behind us. So we will solve our biggest problem. We will give the West a resounding defeat. We will strengthen our society and our political structures and our economic structures long term. We will forge more alliances, and we'll come out stronger from this. And I'm sure those words are being said in the Kremlin, even as we're talking. And I suspect that Putin is becoming increasingly receptive to those words, even if he hasn't yet fully accepted them. So I think what you're saying, even if it isn't the Kremlin's policy now, could very easily become it.
Yeah, I remember
And
when
the Russian population would support it as well.
because they're going after the Russian population.
Exactly.
What country wants to be ruled over by Sullivan and Newland and Hunter Biden? We're going through all of this for Hunter Biden. Really, people are clapping this on for Hunter Biden. Is that where we've come to? And I'm talking conservatives and libertarians who are clapping this whole escalation of World War III. They're egging it on. Yeah, let's go for it. So you can help Hunter and Christopher Hines and Devin Archer and all these people get their hands on Ukraine and then Russia. You think the Russians are going to tolerate these foreigners going into Russia and breaking up their country? They've already been through it in the 90s.
Yeah.
You think they're going to tolerate these people going into Russia? Russia would rather burn down everything than have these people go into Russia and break it up. And we know that they want to break it up into 5 different pieces. We've seen the maps. They haven't hid that fact. I mean, this is existential.
It is for the Russians. This is the fundamental difference. For the Russians, it's existential. For us in the West, it is not. But we're taking the hit too. So we're taking a hit for something which is not existential for us.
Well, they're going to make it existential for us, the Russians. If they don't turn back, if they continue to press on, it's going to be existential for us.
Absolutely.
You know, what do you do? Is Greece going to collapse? Well, we're going to collapse because of Zelensky. We're going to sacrifice ourselves on the altar of Vladimir Zelensky. Try to make sense of it. Or Meta Biada. And people in the chat know what I'm referring to when I say the company Meta Biada. This is where we're going to sacrifice our country. On the altar of these guys and these shady businesses.
Absolutely. And the whole of the world, by the way, the whole of the rest of the world is looking at this and they're agreeing with you. I mean, you know, one of the most interesting things is the way in which, when you look at the countries that have supported the United States, or at least the administration, let's not say the United States, the administration, it's the collective West. It doesn't go beyond it.
Yeah.
No country outside the collective West has signed up to this enterprise.
They don't want any part of it.
They don't want to do any part of it.
Yeah. And Vucic in Serbia, because we say collective West, he's come out and said, this needs to end. We don't want any part of this. Orban has said, we don't want any part of this. You know, the funny thing is that you have Hungary and Poland. Now, Orban has taken a very rational and logical stance. And he says, you know, this has to end. We don't want any part of this. Poland has taken the reverse stance and they want to escalate. And it's funny because just 2 months ago, Hungary and Poland were being sanctioned by the European Union and the EU, along with Biden. They were saying that Law and Justice, the Law and Justice Party, as well as Orban, they were fascist dictators.
I know.
I mean, literally like 2 months ago.
I know. It's a reversal, and I think that this is one of the particular achievements, if you like, of the EU, and one which Poland has achieved, is that for the time being, the Polish-Hungarian axis has been split. And it's been split on this issue of Russia. And one can't help but sense that at the core of it, there is this blind, visceral fixation that Jaroslaw Kaczynski, the de facto leader of Poland, has about reviving the Rzeczpospolita, if that's really his plan. But anyway, whatever. This obsession he has with Russia, who he believes murdered his brother, completely wrongly, by the way. But anyway, that's what he thinks. And it's leading Poland, I think, to disaster. By the way, the Poles had exactly the same kind of policies in the interwar years. And of course, it ended in disaster for them then. They don't seem to learn very much. At least these people in Poland don't. I think in time, you will see a shift in Poland. But for the moment, this is the way it's playing out.
Yeah. Kadyrov is in Mariupol, by the way.
Oh, I know. I've heard about this.
Yeah.
So, now, can I just make, actually, I just want to say something about this, because people who talk about Russia being bogged down in Ukraine and about how the Ukrainians will turn against the Russians forever. They used to say exactly the same thing about the Chechens. You remember that long war in the Caucasus, that the Chechens would never forgive the Russians? Now the Chechens are the fiercest fighters alongside the Russians in Ukraine. Why? Because the Chechens realized that the neocons were using them, and they've never forgiven it. Ukrainians, it'll be exactly the same.
And Russia invested a lot of resources into Chechnya, and
Absolutely.
Grozny is, from what I hear, haven't been there. I would love to visit because I hear it is a beautiful city.
Absolutely.
This is what I hear from
So
a
have
lot
I.
of people, including people from Europe who have visited it, and they say it's
So have
a
I.
stunning city.
So have I. And, you know, it's a very interesting thing is that Russians and Chechens, and I know I've experienced this myself, Russians and Chechens have developed quite extraordinary, friendship ties and, bonds. And I'm sure the same will happen ultimately in Ukraine too, by the way. I think that this is a cardinal misunderstanding of the West. And they, again, have failed to understand the lesson of the Caucasian War. If you use people, eventually they will turn on you. That's what's happened with the Chechens. Eventually it will happen with the Ukrainians too.
Can you say the same about Iraq, Afghanistan as well,
Absolutely,
or is
of course.
that?
I'm sure you can, and I'm sure you should. But I mean, this is another part of the world. I mean, bear in mind, apparently, the Russians are flooded with offers from people across the Middle East who want to engage, to join the fight against the Ukrainians in the fight in Ukraine. And most of them are coming from places like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, wherever. And again, I'm sure it's partly because these people feel so angry with the way in which the neocons destroyed their societies, that this is their way of showing revenge.
Yeah. All right. Well, 30 days, and this is where we are.
Yeah. I would say those photographs, those pictures, there's the videos as well that I have seen. They're long videos before this program, shortly before this program, have left me very, very shaken. And so much so that if anybody comes across videos like that, I would warn them that they are pretty harrowing to see.
Yeah, but I mean,
yeah, it is the true face of war.
It's the true face of war, exactly.
Yeah.
No, and journalists like Patrick in the Donbass, and now he's in Mariupol, and he's documenting everything.
Yeah.
These are our eyes and our ears as to what's going on in
Yes.
Mariupol, and we're seeing it firsthand. In Greece, I'm seeing the testimony from people, Greek Ukrainians, who are also telling us what it was really like being held as a hostage of the Azov guys.
Yeah.
And they're telling us what it's like. And it is making a difference in Greece. People in Greece are starting to say, you're telling me the media was lying to us? And the media doesn't know what to do. They're scrambling. They're trying to figure out a solution to this.
My brother,
we were occupied by the Nazis from 1941 to 1944, and the government is trying to find a way to whitewash the Azov guys.
I know. My brother in Greece is telling me exactly the same thing, and he's telling it to me independently of yourself, but it's exactly the same. And of course, it's not just on social media. Apparently, it's circulating because, of course, Greece is a small place, and people talk and meet and know each other, and it's spreading now also by word of mouth right across the population.
Yeah,
and that's
crazy. Yeah. Let's get to a lot of questions because I know you're also on a time constraint. If we don't answer all the questions, we'll put put together a special video to answer all those questions. But let's try to get all the questions answered. Alexander from Ihang 101 says, if Western Europe lifts their sanctions, will Russia even trade with the EU?
That's a very, very good question. My short answer is they will trade with the EU, but it will never go back to the level that it was before. And I think that you will find that Gazprom, in any event, will start to renegotiate its contracts and then slowly cancel them when they run out, and that Russian energy flows will now be permanently directed eastward. Russian trade will permanently be directed eastward. The Eurasian choice has now been conclusively made. It cannot be undone now.
Yeah. David, thank you for that super chat. Raphael says, I am 100% sure the only West miscalculated the Russians. They did not talk to Alexander to explain to them the fabric or makeup of Russians. It's different
No.
people.
It's a fact that you thank you for that comment, Raphael. But actually, there's lots of good commentators, analysts, observers, people who've been to Russia and understand the country and its people. And I know how deeply frustrating it is for many people like that, real experts, that they've been completely frozen out of discussions. I wouldn't even call myself a Russia expert. I just know the country a certain amount. Alex knows it better. He's lived there. But, it's always been to me blindingly obvious that the neocons and many of the decision makers in the West and many of the people who write in the newspapers and in the media don't know tiddly squat about the country.
Yeah. Raphael also says, I am not superbly educated, but I find the crash the West truly thinks Russia is alone on this. They do not understand Russia chooses to do it alone.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Well, because they can. If they couldn't have done it by themselves, they wouldn't have done it. It's the straightforward answer. They can do it.
Yeah. Eslam, welcome to the Duran community. Kalu25 says, I just received the hoodies from the Duran shop there. Exactly. They are excellent. Great quality, comfy, and beautiful. I put the Russian flag on them. I recommend them to everyone. Go buy a cool piece of clothing and help the Duran while you're doing it. Yes, we've got flags from all kinds of countries. And if anyone wants a flag that they don't see up there, just email me and we'll create your country flag on that merch. Jordan, thank you for your super chat. Arjun, thank you for joining the community. Commander Crossfire says, to be objective is to be pro-Russian. The West has become a comic book villain. The things being done may someday be forgiven, but will not be forgotten.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And I think at some point when people in the West realize the extent to which the media has been telling them nonsense, it will be coming on top of one false story and false narrative after another. I think we will see a final and complete crisis in the media in the West. But then, of course, what they will probably try to do is that they will exclude even further alternative voices. They will build up the media control even more. But even that won't help. If you spend time again in Russia and talk to people about what the Soviet press media was like, they'll tell you, up to about the 1950s, people in the Soviet Union tended to believe it. From about the 1960s, they began to have doubts. By the 1970s, its credibility had all but crashed.
Yeah. Orlando, thank you for that super sticker. Golden Sun said, Vicky's War, 100%. Hashtag Vicky's War.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. No,
it is.
It is. Yeah.
Why are we going through it for these people? Why? Sophia says, check out Patrick Lancaster's channel. Recommended. Yes, absolutely. Recommend that channel. NV number 1, thank you for that super chat. Orama, thank you for that super sticker. Raphael says, Shakespeare, Montesquieu, Rashe, Molière, Emerson, Longfellow, Thoreau. I start to question, how good were they to humanity? To humanity, slavery existed.
Well, it's true enough, but I think they were good for humanity. Now, just consider that extraordinary list of writers that you just mentioned and thinkers, people like Montesquieu, Thoreau, or the others. Who do we have in the West today who comes even close to achieving their kind of intellectual weight and power? No one at all. And doesn't that tell you something about what we've done to our culture and civilization? A place where, what's his name? Bernard Levy, whatever his name is, the man in France, is considered a serious thinker.
The guy in Odessa?
No, yeah, the guy in Odessa. That's right.
Yeah.
he's treated seriously as a serious thinker. This is a parody of the kind of culture that France used to have. And why is this so? Because debate, thought, intellect in the West is no longer tolerated if it branches off into dissent.
Yeah, Matt, thank you for that super chat. Thank you, Matt. If Biden's the de facto leader of Ukraine and the Ukraine army are naughty, does that make Biden naughty too?
Well, it does. I mean, you put it in a rather frivolous way and it's a serious topic. But yes, I think so. Carry on, Alex.
No, I was just saying that Biden, there was no doubt that under Obama for 2 years, Biden was running the show. After that, you had the pause with Trump and then you had and Gonzalo Lira, like I said, check out his video on Newland. Then you had all the same neocons after Trump was ushered out of office. You had the same neocons come right back into place. The same exact ones under Obama and under Bush and under all these administrations. They came right back into place. You had a 4-year pause.
Yeah.
So, and they're back running the show again, the neocons. Nick, thank you for that super sticker. Anthony Madison says, follow the money, Switzerland.
Well, that is a big story. That is a very big story, actually, and one that I don't know the inside plot about it. I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, Switzerland was studiously neutral during the Second World War, and this time it's sided so completely with the West. There's something's happened there, and somebody can perhaps explain it to us, and it's perhaps a good topic for a good program.
Sanjeva says, Alexander, you were quite skeptical about the ruble for gas idea, the ruble for gas / oil idea. What is the actual situation? Can it actually be done, or is it bluster by Putin?
No, it's clearly not bluster by Putin. It's a serious plan. I have to say, I was surprised because, well, frankly, when something of such enormity happens in such a way, you do wonder exactly how it's going to work out. But it's clearly a serious plan, and it's being implemented as of the 31st of March. Now, I was very interested to see what the West would say. They didn't come around and say, oh, no, absolutely, this is absolutely outrageous. It's a ridiculous plan. The Russians insist that we pay in rubles, then we're not going to pay in rubles, and we're going to dispense with their gas and oil and coal entirely. Well, I get the sense that, in fact, they're preparing to sit down and talk and do it. So it looks like it's a serious plan. So, yes, I was skeptical, but I was wrong to be.
Yeah. Important update. Putin has appointed Kadyrov as Lieutenant General of Russia's armed forces. Interesting.
Yeah. No, and I did wonder, actually, whether that would happen. I thought that it would probably happen. It's obviously it's not just symbolic. I mean, it's obviously a way of saying thank you.
Yeah. McElray says, how can we account for the fact that the entire Western mainstream media are in lockstep on Ukraine, even the Greeks, as you just mentioned? Wherein lies such control? Where is the control?
That is a very, very good question. But they were in complete lockstep over Russiagate, which was, ludicrous. I mean, not just ludicrous, beyond ludicrous. They were in complete lockstep, apart from the New York Post, over the Hunter's laptop. So, I mean, that control clearly exists. How it operates, what the internal mechanics of it are, I'm not so sure. But, that's something that one day we will no doubt discover.
Angelson says, not that neutral. They took the German gold. And Manny Alvarez says, referencing Switzerland there.
I'm aware of the business in the Second World War. Absolutely. I know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Manny Alvarez says, cultural collapse has been occurring since the 1960s and the Marxist takeover of higher education.
Yeah, I accept that. I absolutely agree with that. In fact, you could actually point your finger to the 1960s as the time when Western intellect, the intellectual tradition in the West, the cultural tradition in the West began to fail. I mean, we've had no major big league intellectual appear anywhere in the West comparable to those we used to have since the 1960s.
Density Flinch says, Swiss got woke, at least in big cities, and now identify with the empire of woke, which is essentially what the West is.
Yeah, well, there you go.
All right. Excellent comments there. And Retep says, why the Russians did not discover what the CIA was planning in 2014 and why they haven't intervened to stop them before they chased away Yanukovych.
This is a question that the Russians talk about and argue about and discuss endlessly
They weren't
amongst
ready.
themselves. They weren't ready. I
They
mean, I
got
think
caught
there's partly that
flat-footed.
they
Sochi.
weren't ready. Exactly. They got distracted about the Sochi Olympics, which was I mean, at the time, I thought this was going to turn out extremely badly. I think that Russia should never host international sports competitions. Of course, they won't have the option now, but I've always thought it was a mistake that all that ever happens is that some great scandal happens and that the entire political system focuses on that and other things happen around them which go hideously wrong. So, I mean, there was partly that, but also, I mean, clearly they weren't paying enough attention to Ukraine. They weren't sending good people to be their ambassadors to the country. Their intelligence operation there had got run down. I mean, they screwed up.
Yeah. Thank you, Donald, for that generous super chat. Donald W. This is a great question from Jay Galt. Alexander, you have an aversion to noble last stands.
Yeah.
Do you have a heterodox take on the Battle of Thermopylae, role in rallying the Greeks?
But you see, the whole point about Thermopylae was that it was not a pointless last stand. Thermopylae was the people who fought there, Leonidas and his Spartans, knew perfectly well what they were doing. I mean, it was providing time for the other Greek states to mobilize and prepare to defend themselves and to organize a counterattack. I mean, they made a conscious decision to lay down their lives, but they did it not because they thought that they would, their side would lose, but because they believed that in time their side would win, or that they thought that their side had a chance to win. I don't see any point at all in continuing a last stand right up to the point where defeat is inevitable. That seems to me ludicrous. I mean, that's what the German leadership did in the Second World War. I know many people in Germany ever since have felt deeply betrayed by what the German leadership at that time did. You know whom I'm talking about. I know how that shattered, more even than revelations about the Holocaust, that shattered a lot of German people's faith in that leadership, which had persisted almost until the end. And it seems to me that Ukraine is making the same mistake. Let us not compare what Ukraine is doing now with Thermopylae.
Yeah. Andrew says, Trump was a pause, question mark. He started sending weapons to Ukraine, pulled out of the INF treaty, tried to overthrow Venezuela, and assassinated Soleimani. Same policies with different rhetoric. No. Can I comment on this real quick? Because it's a statement that I made. Yeah, Andrew, you're exactly right. What I meant as a pause, a 4-year pause, I meant with regards to Newland and her crew of neocons. Trump did have Bolton, but to me, Bolton was more, and other neocons, but the neocons that Trump had seemed to be more fixated on North Korea and the Middle East rather than Ukraine. I think the neocons that are fixated on Ukraine are the Nuland Kagan neocons. But yeah, no doubt he poured weapons into Ukraine and the INF treaty and Soleimani. But with regards to Ukraine, I think that's a different faction of neocons that are fixated on Ukraine. Bolton, though he's anti-Russian, he seems more fixated on the Middle East and North Korea. I mean, that's just my take. I could be wrong.
I think you're absolutely right, actually. I'm going to say something else. I mean, the thing about Trump, I mean, he did lots of things which were wrong. He did lots of things which I think were bad. He always knew how to go right up to the brink and then stop. He had an instinct for this, and he really did diplomacy. I remain absolutely convinced that he would never have allowed this disaster that we're seeing happen. I mean, he would have known exactly how far to go and when to stop. The problem is with this president, he doesn't have any ability to stop. Even if he understood that he needed to stop, he wouldn't know how to do it.
Yeah. Commander Crossfire says Lavrov called it like it is. The West is waging total hybrid war against Russia. The goal is the end of the Russian people as a whole, as a people.
Yeah. I am more and more Russians. The majority of Russians now see that. And by the way, I understand that Biden's speech has been repeatedly reshown on Russian television.
Of course. Of course. Sanjay says, fantastic work of the Duran. God bless you both. Thank you, Sanjay. Nitswitch says, NATO, U.S. Special Forces are already in Ukraine, question mark.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm sure they are. I mean, officially they're not, but I'm sure they are. I don't think that they are in the actual battle zone in Donbass. I think they're probably, lurking around Kiev and Lviv. That's where I think they mainly are.
Jim P says, Carthage must be destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much the fantastic, the obsession. But which is Carthage and which is Rome? I mean, that's perhaps the other question to ask oneself. And when I say that, I mean that because who ultimately gets destroyed if you wage this kind of war? Nobody should seek anybody's destruction. Every state should learn, every great nation should learn to live in peace with the other. That was the traditional policy of the United States. What was it Lincoln said in his second inaugural address? The very last words: peace between ourselves and all nations. That was what the American policy historically always was.
Raphael says, I don't think the West understands that Russia decoupled themselves out of their system already and their own. Hard to hurt them anymore.
Absolutely true. I think that's entirely right. Somebody also said, it might even have been Raphael, actually, in an earlier live stream that we did many, many weeks ago, that in a war, economic war of attrition, what matters is who has the resources, who has the energy, who has the food, who's able to keep the lights on and, the food on the table.
Yeah.
And the Russians have that in abundance.
Yes, they do. Zeshan, thank you for that super sticker. Summer of 1970, thank you for that super sticker. John, thank you for that super chat. Glad to donate to two amazing men. Thank you, John. A fantastic, talented analyst is John. Thank you very much. Moto, thank you for that super chat. Raymond Piper says, Putin will press the button if we push him.
Well, I mean, let's not go down these terrible speculations, but the Russians have made it absolutely clear that if it comes to an all-out war, they will defend themselves with everything they have. And I think we should take that very seriously.
Yeah. RDDR says, liberalism under unipolarity went from critiquing historical orders to rationalizing them. Is this a conservative Thermador phase for globalism?
What a complex question. Thermador, just to explain to people, was the month of July and partly August under the French Revolutionary calendar, the new calendar that replaced the Christian calendar during the hardest period of the French Revolution. And when two people talk about the Thermadorian reaction, it relates to an event that happened in July 1795, from memory, when Robespierre, who was the leader of the French Revolution at that point, fell as a result of what was essentially a breakdown, a division within the French revolutionary government. And that set in train a conservative reaction, which ultimately ended the more extreme phase of the French Revolution. So as I read this question, and I hope I'm getting this right, that this is the most extreme point, if you like, of our neocon project. If it fails and if they fall, then we will have a conservative reaction. At least I hope I'm getting this correct. Well, perhaps we'll just have to see. I mean, there are things one can't predict, but it has to fail first. And at the moment, it's not failed. At the moment, it's being pursued, and it's being pursued relentlessly, and even, dare I say, pathologically.
Yeah, pathologically. It's a great word to describe it. Sergeant Just Babe, thank you for that super sticker. And Freedom Autopsy Report says, have the neocons been influenced by Trotsky and the Fourth International?
Absolutely. No question about it. Many of the original neocons, those that appeared in the 1970s, were ex-Trotskyists. And of course, they were very, very influenced by Trotsky's ideas. Trotsky's idea of continuous revolution, Trotsky's idea of expanding the revolution to every corner of the world. Of course, they reconstructed their idea of what the revolution should be. But point was, Trotsky's ideas were rejected in the Soviet Union. where Stalin said, we're going to pursue socialism in one country. This is in the 1920s. He later changed his views. But anyway, in the 1920s, socialism in one country. We're not going to go around the world trying to export our revolution, trying to change everybody's to our way of thinking. We're not strong enough. The Soviet Union doesn't have that kind of strength. That was, of course, the Stalin of the 20s. And, of course, Trotsky rejected that. He continued to advocate continuous revolution, ultimate revolutionary expansion. Lots of people, especially in New York, by the way, within the communities in New York, he had a lot of influence in the United States amongst the progressive left. And it's, as it then was, and what's now happened, it seems to me, is that as many of these people became neocons, they still took with them certain things that Trotsky taught them, such as commitment to continuous revolution, commitment to revolutionary expansion, and of course what Trotsky also developed, which is a great antipathy to his home nation, which was Russia.
Mr. Wick, thank you for that awesome super chat. Thank you, Wick, thank you for that. Linda Key says, Obama said Assad must go, fail. Instructs Biden to say Putin must go, fail.
True enough.
Not only Obama, Cameron said Assad must go. Merkel said Assad must go.
They all did, yeah.
They all did, yeah. Assad is still there.
And now he's just had a very successful trip to the UAE, by the way, where he's going to be rehabilitated by all the Gulf monarchies. So you're absolutely right. Can I make one point, which is that Obama has been very, very quiet over the course of this affair, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Very quiet. Mitt P says, thank you for bringing us all the updates. Rather listen to you guys than the Western media. Thank you, Mitt P, for that. Mitt P also says, Trudeau and Brandon are on the job solving the food crisis. Might as well put Laurel and Hardy on the job. Yeah.
Laurel and Hardy would do far better.
Unfortunately for Canada, I would also say that it's more like Freeland is running the show than Trudeau, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Elena says, Germany forbade the letter Z, but hasn't forbidden swastikas. Logic. We live in a Shakespearean world. Everything is theater.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have they really forbidden the
as I understand it, also, the swastika is forbidden. But I mean, I can't see how they could forbid the letter Z because it's part of their alphabet. So I mean, they use the Latin alphabet.
They may find.
I mean, how would you write zeitgeist, for example, if you can't use the letter Z? But anyway, look, I'm sure all sorts of bizarre things are happening in Germany at the moment, and that Germany, of all places, given the various laws they have, given the history that they have, should be siding with the government that, has all these right-wing militia groups. I mean, that is astonishing. And I can't help but think it's because most Germans simply don't know about it. I would say, by the way, that the most anti-Russian, the most controlled media in the West, going beyond the British and the American, believe it or not, is the German.
And Germany is going to be the biggest loser from the sanctions war. Yeah. From the sanctions war, Germany, I believe, is going to be the biggest loser in all of this.
Absolutely, and it also has, by the way, amongst Germans, their media has the weakest credibility. There's even the expression "the lying press," which is used in everyday speech in Germany. And in that TV series, the drama series about the Weimar Republic, set in the Weimar Republic, that Robert Barnes and myself separately both enjoy, I noticed that the expression lying press was even used. So there we are.
Yeah. Eurogabor says, unfortunately, it is not the final nail in the coffin of globalism, but my mail-in ballot is ready to cast within days for the election in Hungary. The thorn will be pushed deeper to the side of the EU.
Yeah, I hope so. Good. Yes. Please. Thank you for that. Quite a comment.
Yes. Eurogabor. Red Rum says, any recommendations for accurate history books on post-Cold War Russia, Ukraine? Any other books, authors, videos, lectures on recent history come to mind?
The best historian on post-war Ukraine and its relations with Russia is Richard Sakwa. That's Sakwa. Now, he's written extensively. Of course, he writes as a historian and an academic, and you don't always agree with his political take on things. But I'd say overall he's pretty sound. Another person you might want to look at is is a US academic called Nikolai Petrov, who also writes pretty well on these topics and who writes lots of articles and things like that as well.
Raphael says Russia, China, and Iran, North Korea, they are ready to lose 100 million plus of their citizens tomorrow, and these countries will be standing. Europe and America do not have this capacity. Fact.
I'm afraid that's true. I mean, I obviously don't want that. But to be absolutely clear, they would, make much greater sacrifices than we would. Because, I mean, for them, it is their entire survival that is at stake. They feel that we are threatening their survival. We don't feel that our survival is threatened by them. And that's a fundamental difference.
Hitchin B said, I just received Hunter Biden emails, Rosemont Seneca. No one to say there is a conflict of interest between the big guy and his war. No judge.
No judge. Well, there you go.
Meta Beata. Commando Crossfire says, Ukraine ceased to exist in 2014. The territory must be liberated. The extremists must be expelled. The West's chains of slavery must be broken, in my opinion.
Well, yes. I mean, I should make it very clear. I mean, when Ukraine became independent, I wished it well. I mean, I had never thought of it previously before the breakup of the Soviet Union as an independent country, because nobody in the West did until, the period just preceding Ukraine's independence. But, I when it did break away, I accepted there was a real Ukrainian identity, that these people had a real tradition, a real language. And yes, by all means, they were entitled to their state and to their country. And I wish them well. But it's all gone horribly wrong. And I think part of the reason it's gone so horribly wrong is because we in the West try to use them against Russia.
Maggie Truck says, I don't mean to criticize, but we were all wrong, including the Duran, in thinking Russia would not invade initially. Could we all be wrong about not having a World War III?
Well, you could very well be wrong about not having a World War III. I mean, all I can say is I don't think it's going to happen. Now, about what happened before the war, I didn't think that the Russians would simply invade. But I always said, and the Duran always said, that if there was an attack on Donbass, Russia would respond. And the clear indications, as far as I'm concerned, are that there was an attack on Donbass and that was the final straw that led to this.
Yeah. Sparky says, like Gaddafi, Ambassador Stevens was pro-Africa.
Yeah. Well, there we go. That's my dog getting very excited. I'm sorry. But yes, I believe he was.
Yeah. Yeah. What did Hillary Clinton say? What difference does it make? When she was testifying about Libya and Benghazi, what difference does it make?
What is it? I know, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure they feel the same about all those poor people that I saw in those fields, those dead dead people.
Exactly.
I mean,
what difference does it make?
I mean, I don't understand that kind of thinking. I mean, as I said, it horrified me.
Yeah. Sanjiva says, Alexander, do you think Russia will accept anything less than total surrender at this point, given the cost for Russia? The mood is hardening, I think, in Russia. Don't you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's yet hardened to the point that if the Ukrainians came along and agreed to Russian terms and, in ways that the Russians could trust, I think that the Russians would probably say, well, we got what we wanted. Now we can move forward with, sorting things out in Ukraine. But the longer this goes on, the harder the mood in Russia will become, and the more difficult it will be for Ukraine.
Let's see. From the Daily Express, China's Sinopec Group pulled out of a $500 million deal to market Russian gas in China due to fears of sanctions. Your thoughts?
I know. This is exactly the same thing happened in 2014. The way to understand these things is this: these sanctions have been announced. The Chinese government has told them they haven't pulled out of it. They suspended their work on it. They're then going to really look into all of this, work out some new mechanism, and it will proceed in a way that is more sanctions proof. That's exactly what happened in 2014. It will happen again.
Exactly. Rob M., welcome to the Duran community. And Mona says, don't you think Biden was provoking Putin so Russia will go all in and that may lead to World War III?
Well, I think he was provoking Putin. I think he was doing so in the intention that he would then impose the sanctions, and that sanctions would then create the political crisis in Moscow, and that Putin would fall. And of course, the problem is that's not happening. They're finding themselves in a war of attrition, an economic war of attrition, and in a war of attrition, an actual war of attrition in Ukraine, which is destroying Ukraine. That I want to make that absolutely clear. I've read people say, that the fact that it's a war of attrition is somehow, a defeat for the Russians. It is what the Russians setting out to do.
Well,
it is destroying Ukraine.
Can I give you the argument?
Yeah.
No, I just want to give you the argument that people would throw at you when you say that is, well, doesn't Ukraine have the right to defend their country from an invader?
Absolutely, they have the right to defend their country against an invader. But is this an invasion, or is this the result of a civil war, in which Ukraine itself refused to follow through with that agreement, the Minsk agreement, which was the basis for a settlement of that war? They didn't do it. They didn't agree, and that Russia is a guarantor of that agreement. So, I mean, it's not as straightforward as people say. They try to reduce things to, this is a simple invasion. The fact was, the country that reneged on its obligations, and what can't get away from this, was Ukraine. They had, a clear line towards achieving peace, and instead, they in effect chose war. And now they're losing. And I blame them to a great extent, but I blame us in the West even more, because we encourage them to go down this path, and we see what's happening.
France and Germany were also guarantors of Minsk,
absolutely,
correct?
and they completely failed to execute on what they had undertaken to do. They weren't just guarantors. Along with the Russians, they brokered the Minsk agreement.
Raymond Piper says, spot on, Alexander. Thank you for that. And Raphael says, the world is made of 7+ billion of people. USA, EU, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada combined are not 1 billion. Simply arithmetic.
True enough.
Very true. So, summer of 1970, welcome to the Duran community. Friday Monroe, welcome to the Duran community. Sparky says, hopefully India and Brazil take full advantage.
Oh, well, they will. The Indians, I know, apparently are very keen to. I mean, and I have to say, I mean, this has been quite a revelation, actually, how keen they are to pick up the slack. And by the way, a lot of these things, the companies that have pulled out of Russia, with the ones that make the sort of high-end luxury goods. I know a little bit about India. It has massive capabilities there. You want, beautiful clothes or nice shoes or things like that. India is your place. I mean, they got wonderful tailors, for example. I mean, you can get tailoring in New Delhi, which is every good as Savile Row.
Yeah, the rise of India is I think one of the big stories here. Yeah. Herding Cat says, what parts of the globe will not be affected by this economic food fight? South America, Africa?
Every part of the globe will be affected by this food crisis. And I have to say again, the casual way in which Biden spoke about this made my blood run cold. I mean, it made me very angry, actually. Yeah. He has no right to talk like that. He has absolutely no right to talk in that kind of way, casually, about what people will go through.
Yeah, he says, and these sanctions are going to hurt us as well. That's what he said.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
They're going to hurt us as well. Then why are you doing them?
No, exactly.
Why are you doing these sanctions if they're going to hurt your own people?
Yes.
With a country that you don't have an alliance with.
Exactly. Well, and a country that has been offered terms for peace, which are going to be imposed on it in the end anyway, if it doesn't make peace. So, I mean, what is this all for? I come back to this. What are we achieving? We're making ourselves poorer, and we're allowing lots of people in Ukraine to die, or causing lots of people in Ukraine to die.
Nitswitch says Berlin's airport was delayed several times, still with problems, much more expensive than planned. Will this ingenuity build the LG terminals? Question mark. Yeah, there was an expert on locals, Alexander, who was an expert on LNG terminals and stuff like this, and the comment was that when they say 4 years to build one, make it 10.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not; these aren't simple
Yeah.
things at all.
Yeah, because you see, and you get people like Robert Habeck who have absolutely no understanding of this, because though Germany has enormous engineering traditions, I don't get the impression that Robert Habeck actually seeks advice from the experts. I mean, in the run-up to the war and the crisis, I can remember that the administration in Washington sought advice from the oil industry, and they told them, you can't replace Russia. This simply isn't possible. Did they pay any attention? No, they didn't.
What about the Fed?
The Fed, they didn't
told
even
Biden,
consult.
Don't do this.
Don't do this. They told them don't de-SWIFT, and they just went ahead and did it anyway. And on freezing the central bank, the assets of the Russian central bank, and sanctioning it, the Fed wasn't even consulted at all.
Talk about a runaway train.
Yeah.
Jeez, this Biden administration. Freddie Monroe said, we Americans have to make our congressional delegation end the slaughtering in Ukraine, with World War III dangerously fast approaching as this war grinds on.
I think that's an entirely commendable sentiment. And I think every American should listen to this. Sorry to say this. The only place you can stop this runaway train, it's not London, it's not Berlin, it's certainly not Brussels. It is Washington. If Congress changes its stance, and it might do. I mean, I see that there are people within the Republican Party who are now starting to think. Took a while, but there are people in the Republican Party who are starting to understand what's going on, and who are listening to people, as they pay the higher prices. Well, maybe they can bring this runaway train to a stop. They could even do something about this administration itself, actually.
Jennifer Chang, thank you very much for that awesome super chat, Jennifer. And Gender Neutral says, it's not about Hunter. It's the Davos order out of chaos plan. War, famine, shortages all serve to implement control. Ukraine is just an excuse.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think there are lots of people in Davos and the rest who do think in these terms. I come back to what I've said before. You create chaos, chaos will overwhelm you in the end. You cannot control chaos. Chaos is not controllable. If it was controllable, it wouldn't be chaos.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you for that super sticker. Jean-Luc Picard says, love you guys. Thank you for that, Jean-Luc. And Maria says, my husband is Ukrainian. He's in Europe, completely certain they'll win in 3 days. Says Peter Lancaster is paid off. Patrick Lancaster is paid off by Russia. It breaks my heart.
It breaks my heart too, and I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Vlad, thank you for that super sticker. Carpenter says,
there's exactly the people, as I said, who, when this is all over, maybe not, I'm not want to talk about that particular person because obviously I don't know him, but I'm sure that there'll be a lot of Ukrainians who believe all this, and when it all ends and when they understand the price, well, as I said, they will turn and they will be angry with those who led them up this led them to this disaster.
Daniel Lee, thank you for that super sticker. And the Carpenters says, I know officially this started as a peacekeepers mission, but did the physically enter as peacekeepers? And if so, were they fired upon first, or did fighting escalate during liberating the Donbass? Thanks.
I do think they entered as peacekeepers. Is the short answer. I mean, that it was never couched in that way. What happened was the mechanics of it was that Putin recognized the two republics of the Donbass, which were at that point in time being shelled, and were anticipating an attack by the Ukrainian army, and entered into defense agreements with those two republics. And then those two republics immediately invoked those two defense agreements, the alliance, in effect, that they'd entered into with Russia in order to defeat and throw back this Ukrainian attack upon them. So they weren't peacekeepers. This was the activation of a very, very rapidly and hurriedly put together military alliance. By the way, can I just make one observation? One of the revelations of this war is how extremely well organized the militias, the two militias in the Donbass, actually are. In a lot of this fighting in eastern Ukraine, especially in Mariupol, they, together with the Chechens, have been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the really tough fighting.
Yeah. Habib says the actual Department of War in the U.S. is the State Department, not the DOD. Alex and Alexander, I want to contribute and provide parallel content, and thank you from here in the USA.
Well, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you, and your point is exactly spot on.
Yeah. Anthony Green, welcome to the Duran community. Hugo says, very educational program, and thank you for the wisdom. How do I watch the whole program again? It's saved on Rumble, on Odyssey, on YouTube, on Locals. When it ends, you can just click on any of the links that we have, and you can see the whole program. Sparky says Kolomoisky is in Switzerland. Coincidence? Question mark.
No, I'm sure it's not.
Yeah. Evgeny says, how was church
so
yesterday?
Is Khodorkovsky. So I believe it's Khodorkovsky a lot of the time. Sometimes he's in Britain too.
Yeah. Evgeny says, how was church yesterday?
Well, I didn't actually go. I should tell people I was actually suffering from a migraine yesterday, so I stayed at home. But my wife, who is the mother of my children, went with my children to church because it's Mothering Sunday in the certainly the Western calendar. I'm not sure to what extent it is in Greece, but anyway.
Yeah. Jane, welcome to the Duran community. James S. says, is there any kind of potential inflection point that would destroy the Western narrative, or is it so walled off that nothing can permeate?
I don't think nothing can permeate it. If Ukraine collapses over the course of the next month, I think that will certainly dent the Ukrainian narrative. But I suspect also that there will be strenuous attempts to rationalize it in some way, to explain, that they were worn down by sheer weight of numbers and all that. By the way, on the question of numbers, if the briefing that the Russian General Staff gave last week is correct, and I'm sure it is, the Ukrainian military actually outnumbers the Russians.
Yeah, that is true. Pierre says the globalist elite grift is coming to an end. Kudos for discerning and intelligent analysis and commentary. You're a class act.
Thank you very much
for that. Russell says, Jake Sullivan, Victor Pinchuk, your thoughts. How do we avoid FF setup Russia weak narrative?
Very good question. I don't know about the connections between Pinchuk and Sullivan, but I'm told that they are extensive, and clearly
the
there's a lot.
Foundation.
I think, well, that's right. Yeah.
And Sullivan is a Clinton.
Pinchuk is a major funder, of course, of the Clinton Foundation. I mean, he's been very, very, very heavily involved in all of that. I think what we just have to do is work hard to try to expose these things. And by the way, there are places, this is where the US is different from Europe. If you go to a place like the Federalist website, for example, they do actually do work in exposing this kind of thing, as does to a certain extent the New York Post, for example, or the Washington Times. There are still sort of mainstream media outlets in the US that actually still do this kind of work in the US. In Europe, in Britain, nobody knows who Pinchuk is. He's never mentioned.
Yeah. Raphael says, oh my God, I forgot to make this point. Among all Russian leaders, Putin is a dove. Medvedev is a hawk.
Absolutely.
He was so tough.
Absolutely. This is, by the way, I've been making this point for years and years and years and years. People got this completely the wrong way around. I mean, Medvedev, he may come across as slightly, more, smooth character than Putin, but in many respects, he's a more hardline figure than Putin is. He's been consistently so. And I think this has come as a shock to some people in the West. And I've noticed other people like, well, I'm going to say the Saker, who has classified Medvedev as an Atlantic integrationist, something I never believed. I think he's having some trouble grasping, how completely wrong about Medvedev he always was. But I've always been saying that people have got Medvedev wrong.
Yeah, but you, just to be fair, you you like the Saker as well. I mean, he's
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I follow
he's-
the Saker
yeah.
very closely. I mean, again, I don't agree with everything he writes by any means, but I mean, I do think that he's a very fine and insightful analyst of Russian things.
Yeah, absolutely. Toilet Sauce says Kadyrov got promoted. Lukashenko won't be happy. Quote, Putin promised to make me colonel. Very, very good comment, Toilet Sauce. Raul Pinto says Houthis attacked Aramco a couple of days ago. More attacks like this can seriously put more pressure on the current European crisis. Your thoughts?
Absolutely true. I mean, the wars in the Arabian Gulf are far from concluded, and of course, if there's a major blow up there, well, our situations in Europe, which are already bad, are going to get a whole lot worse. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't want to see war. I certainly don't want to see war in the Gulf. I mean, goodness knows, with the neocons in charge in Washington, one just wonders what they might do, what kind of lunacies they might embark on in that case.
Rockbass, thank you for that super sticker. Gordon, thank you for that super sticker. And Random Chiller, thank you for that super sticker. And Everest says the plan is to control the world via the issuance of currency. The people of the world are to own nothing and to be a nobody, to just be isolated pod people who depend on the fake money system for everything. Russia gets it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Well, and of course, what you've just outlined is what Klaus Schwab has been writing in his various books, Fourth Industrial Revolution and all that.
Yeah. Filipina Traveler TV says, many thanks to the Duran channel, especially you, Alex and Alexander. I learned a lot from your topics. Always very interesting. Thank you very much for that. Super chat. And Iris says, is the second strike on Lviv a response from Russia to the US, NATO, Poland, stay out of the West?
I think it partly is, but I think also that the Russians are taking out actual targets there. I mean, I think that the target, the strike on that base a week or so ago, which killed all those people who were coming in from the West, and apparently it was incredibly devastating. And again, the Russian General Staff says that instead of staying, all of those Westerners, those mercenaries, have gone back. So I'm sure it's partly a warning, but I'm sure it's also got a real military purpose.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Jane, thank you for that super sticker. Jay Hoden Aquino, thank you for that super chat. And Tyler says, my small contribution for all your hard work. Thank you, Alex Alexander. Thank you very much. David March says, what do you make of the Ukrainian videos of them shooting the Russian POWs? Apparently, it's constantly on Chinese TV and media.
And it's also constantly on Russian TV and media. Yeah. I'm going to be very straightforward about it. I find it impossible to watch those things. I think that they are hideous, grotesque, monstrous, and that they're war crimes. And of course, importantly, here in Britain, they're never shown.
Yeah.
Media here pretends that they're not happening.
I would just refer people to the live stream from Viva Frey with Robert Barnes. Robert Barnes does a good breakdown with regards of the Geneva Convention and things like this with that with those videos.
Yes,
I mean he gets into the thick of things, and it's a fascinating stream. So I would recommend that. Banjano said Putin is applying the Austerlitz scenario.
That's so clever. That's exactly, of course, what. But I mean, the war that happened. This is the famous battle that Napoleon won against the Russians and the Austrians in 1805, Napoleon's greatest victory, which is exactly what he did. He had a superior force against him, and he broke it up. He sort of kept them in dispersed in sort of penny packets, and then he concentrated his main force against the enemy's main force and overwhelmed it, and then was able to deal with each part of the enemy army individually. It was an extraordinary, brilliant victory, and it bears some resemblance to what's happening now in Ukraine, because that's exactly what the Russians are doing. They're keeping the Ukrainians pinned down, defending places like Kharkov, Sumy, Chernigov, wherever, whilst they destroy Ukraine's main force in Donbass, which is cut off from supplies and reinforcement. And if you want to read the best literary account of the Battle of Austerlitz, it's in War and Peace by Lev Tolstoy.
Yes, who has been cancelled.
Because he's exactly.
Just kidding. Anthony James, thank you for that super sticker. Wolf Larson, thank you for that super chat. Dan Noya says current U.S. West policies are dictated by post-World War II European immigrants or their descendants with many axes to grind. Absolutely no relation to what
Yeah.
Americans actually think or believe.
So true. So absolutely true.
Toilet Sauce says U.S.-Russia relations in a nutshell. U.S., you're fired. Russia, I don't even work for you.
That's brilliant.
K1H says, Alex, I take exception to your lumping libertarians into the seal clapping chorus in support of Ukraine intervention.
Did we ever do that?
I think I did. I
Oh,
think I
okay.
did, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, I don't mean all conservatives. I don't mean
No.
all libertarians. I
No.
don't mean all liberals. I don't
No.
mean all progressives, but
No.
I would say a majority of them
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
or at least the very high profile ones,
Yeah.
are on board. That's just my take.
I
Obviously,
know.
you have people like Ron Paul, who's fantastic. Who's
Yes.
he's been right on everything. And,
Absolutely.
I think he's
Yeah.
the most prominent libertarian.
Yeah.
He's been calling this from the get-go, and
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
not jumping on board.
No.
But yeah,
No. It'd be interesting to
when
see.
we say statements like this, we don't mean everybody. I mean, we're just
No, of course we don't. No.
just for simplicity's sake, we're
Yes.
kind of saying these things. But yeah. Hey man says, took 50 years to dismantle the Soviets. Does the dollar have such a lifespan? As in any divorce, one may be surprised who the children decide to side with.
That's entirely true. Can I just also say something? When collapse comes, it comes suddenly and it comes fast. It's an iron law, especially in economics.
Yeah. MAGA 2020 says Putin should demand America have regime change.
Yeah.
Anna, thank you for that super sticker. No, whoops, I had it here. Lost it.
Just to quickly say,
Yeah.
at the moment, Putin isn't even demanding regime change in Ukraine.
Yeah.
He's negotiating with Zelensky. And there you see the difference. But of course,
No sense.
eventually,
Yeah, go ahead.
eventually things that might change too. I certainly think the United States is in more urgent need of a change of government. I'm not going to talk about regime change.
No sense says, since Moscow is the third Rome, the collective Cato the Elder, also known as neocons, are in fact pleading for their own Carthage destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting super chat.
Well, interesting comment, yeah.
GEC812 also moderating. Thank you very much. GEC says, Alex, as per saying, watch out for the quiet ones.
Yeah, true enough.
Russell says, are you familiar with Reconquista movement in Europe? Appreciate your views. Need to get you on Table of Titans show, Alexander. Reconquista.
The Reconquista, not really. If it's this idea about recapturing our culture, I've heard a little bit about it, but not enough to really discuss in detail. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, and it's something definitely to look out for, I suppose.
Yeah. And then Russell, if for Alexander for the show Table of Titans, just email us and we'll take a look. Moon Dragon says Russia seems to not give in to the West at all.
Again, if you spend any time there, you would not be surprised.
Yeah. Raymond Piper says the West is now paying for its sins.
Well, to a certain extent, that's true. But, let's never forget that, we, or rather our leaders, or rather those 1,000 people who are, we were talking about, who are driving us forward, they are creating this disaster.
Yeah. The elite aren't going to pay the price. It's us that don't want this.
Well, exactly.
We're going to pay the price.
I mean, in Europe, in the EU especially, in the US, I mean, think about the Iraq War. All the people who supported the Iraq War, they went to better things. It's the people who opposed it who paid the price.
And all the people that supported the Iraq War are supporting this war.
Absolutely, of course they are.
All the same people, and many of the same people are behind this war that were behind the Iraq War.
Absolutely.
The same exact people, and the same people were also behind Russiagate and Ukraine Gate. All the same people. Syria, it is all the same people. Kirill says, thanks, guys. I just have no idea how calming what you are doing for me. If not, I would probably go crazy. Thank you, Kirill, for that super chat. Miss Texas G says, can you speak to Indian gold in the Bank of England? Will they be provoked enough to take their gold?
I think they will. The governor of the Indian Central Bank has been making some rather interesting comments about this and has been saying, that India should start making precautions. I don't think they'll do it immediately, but I think quietly you'll see more and more central banks around the world repatriating their gold reserves.
I agree. Esbrian says, how will things change as far as foreign policy, big tech censorship, Hunter Biden, and media propaganda if Republicans win back the U.S. House?
Well, what's going to happen is that big tech will intensify its controls. But what's also happening, and this is where, again, the US is exceptional, and I mean, is that you're starting to see an alternative, a real tech alternative starting to develop. And if you want proof of that, just look below this video at all the various links. And of course, if you're all following us on other platforms, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Sino Rech says, as the EU falls further in recession, how long before France, Germany, and the northern territories dump the pigs and the small satellite eastern nations close to Russia?
I don't know, actually, is the short answer. I think that they will cling on to their ideological project until the point of complete collapse. I don't think that these people have any idea of doing otherwise. I don't think they can even conceive of doing otherwise. They will put enormous pressure on their own people. They will put enormous pressure on the people of these countries. And I, by the way, dislike intensely the expression pigs, but there we go. But they will keep screwing down until they hope this project eventually succeeds, because they know no other, and of course their entire existence depends on it.
Eugene says, if Novorossiya happens, do you think that it's likely the autonomous government of Gagauzia will attempt to join it, whether by referendum or armed insurgency, maybe even push for an independent Gagauzia?
It's possible. Look, I'm not going to predict this that far, and I wouldn't be surprised if something like that does indeed happen.
Brian, welcome to the Duran community. And Sparky says Putin would not have invaded, but for Olaf and Kamala. A lot of truth in
I
that.
agree with that. Also, I cannot overemphasize the disastrous effect of that Munich Security Conference. When I saw it, I hadn't really believed there would be a war until that point. When I saw them all in action, I said to myself, we are in serious trouble. And then when Olaf Scholz came to Moscow, I was already beginning to say to myself, this man is saying all the wrong things.
Paul, thank you for that super sticker. Raphael says, the mistake the US and the EU are making with America, you must take 5% profit every year to be good. Russia, if you break even, they are happy. Everyone is fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Raphael, for that. Interesting super chat. Big Truck says, all atrocities have been committed under radical left-wing fascist movements, the Nazis, Mao, etc.
Well, I understand the point. Yeah.
Yeah. Estefano says, I want to buy one of your merch, but can you make one with my country, the flag of Ethiopia? I think we may have Ethiopia, but I will check. I think we may have it, but let me check. But if we don't, we'll definitely have it up.
Yeah. I've just seen, by the way, I'm not going to read it now because I can't stand the writer, but Financial Times, Ukraine war risks destabilizing the West. I mean, now they've suddenly figured it out. I get these bubbles come up every so often.
Trickle truth is what I call it. Trickle truth.
No.
Alexander, yeah. Courtyards, thank you for becoming a member. Kurt Fromm says, now that no grain is leaving Ukraine, what will happen to the 11 African countries that get all their grain from Ukraine?
I am extremely, anybody with two brain cells to rub together and an actual heart and soul ought to be desperately worried about this. And that's another reason for bringing this war to an end as soon as possible. What do the unfortunate people who live in these countries, why does it matter to them who runs Donbass, or what kind of geopolitical games the neocons want to play?
Yeah. Commander Crossfire says G7 rejects ruble payment for gas. Robert.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I saw that. We'll see what happens. So, what are they going to do? Are they going to give? Are they going to give up gas? What if the Russians? I mean, this is the thing. I think they think that the Russians are bluffing. When has Putin bluffed?
He put an end date. What more do they need?
Absolutely. I know exactly.
He put a date.
Yeah.
Ryan B says, how will Zizhem feel when Z is inevitably removed from the alphabet? Very true, Ryan. Very true. FBI Glowboy says, for clarification, when you say neocons, you're not just referring to those whom identify as conservatives, but rather an amalgamation of neo-libcons, because I wouldn't call Obama Biden conservative. Yeah, I think neo-libs and neocons are like...
Yeah, and it's a vitally important point. Neocons are not conservatives. There's nothing conservative about being a neocon at all. It's just the name they gave themselves, because for a period of time, many of them were aligned with the Republican Party, and well, for that reason, we've adopted it. But there's nothing conservative about being a neocon. Most of them, if anything, as you correctly say, come from progressive left-wing, in some cases Trotskyist backgrounds, and it's a revolutionary, semi-anarchic, extremely dangerous movement, which is utterly alien to the political traditions of the United States.
Eugene says, due to Romania's strategic vulnerability in an area called the Fățani Gate, some geopolitical analysts there are pushing for Romania to invade Ukraine's Bujak region up to the Dniester estuary. Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, it'd be a disastrous mistake, but of course the previous Romanian government, the government of Ion Antonescu during the Second World War, did exactly that. He joined with the Germans, and of course the Romanians went all the way to Odessa and tried to take control of the area, and it created a very, very bitter legacy of anger in these places, and it didn't do Romania any good at all. So I hope that if there are these councils in Romania, the Romanians aren't foolish enough to follow them. And to be straightforward about it, I think that they're far too wise to follow them this time again.
Akali says President Xi will be heading to meet up with the Saudi prince in April, his first overseas trip for some time. Yuan payment contract hopefully gets signed. UAE likely to follow suit. Any comment?
Well, I mean, it's a huge event. I mean, it is at least, it's bigger, to be straightforward about it, than the ruble gas thing, because the ruble gas thing for the moment is essentially limited to Europe. But the oil is the globally traded commodity. So we're looking at the petro RMB, I would say. And can I just say, Lavrov is heading to Beijing on the 31st of March. I'm pretty sure he'll be meeting not just with Wang Yi, but other senior officials of the Chinese leadership, including, for all I know, Xi Jinping.
Paukejan says, when Putin announced his ruble's decision, within hours, Germany had placed itself among the unfriendlies and blurted out a dismissal of Putin's decision. No diplomacy, no restraint. They cannot even bring themselves to count to 10.
I agree. I completely agree.
Excellent comment.
Excellent.
J.K. Wynn says it's baffling why Poland is ready to fight because of history.
Well, I'm afraid there is a romantic tradition in Poland which can sometimes lead the country into all kinds of follies.
Sparky says Putin has had the patience of Job.
Yeah, he's been in power now in one form or another for 22 years. And finally it snapped. Yeah. But, he's also incrementally built Russia up to the point where it can act in the way that it is currently doing.
Mm-hmm. Horse and Carte Blanche, thank you for that super chat. Jimmy GU, thank you for that super chat. Sean O'Brien, thank you for that super chat. John Matthew says, hey, Alex, why Russia is not winning? Russia, they are really losing.
Well, I mean, we provided detailed explanations otherwise. I'm not going to get into a long discussion about this.
No,
if you track them down, find those actual videos of the real battles. And I think Gonzalo is joining us.
Are you there, Gonzalo?
Yeah, I think so. But I think it is Gonzalo.
Hi. How's it going, guys?
Well, it's going very well, Gonzalo. The only thing is, I should tell you, I'm now starting to be time limited.
Yeah. We got a little bit left.
Worries. No, I just wanted to pop in and just see how you guys were going. And
we are well.
How are you doing?
Tell us how you're doing.
Well, the situation here in Kharkov, from what I'm understanding, it has deteriorated somewhat. And it seems that as a practical matter, the Russians have pretty much surrounded the city.
Yeah.
And the problem is that the Russians are not the problem. It's the local forces are getting more desperate and panicking. Yeah. And so there's been a lot of I got the news of today that there's been an increase of brutality among the Ukrainian territorial forces, and which are basically like paramilitary thugs, and they're getting things are spiraling out of control. Even though there are very few people left in Kharkov, I would estimate, but this is practically a guess. But I would say that there's no more than maybe 15% of the population left in the city. But the problem is that the ones who remain and these people, they're getting panicking because there's a sense that the war is lost. I can't quite pin it down how it is, but there's all of a sudden, I would say about 3 or 4 days ago, there was a perception that it was over, and that now it's just a matter of time as to when it really grinds down. And because of it, a lot of people are getting more desperate. I was thinking very seriously of well, I'm not going to discuss my plans, but I've heard different stories that a lot of local defense forces of various sorts are abusing or robbing people who are trying to leave at this time, and so and also shooting at their cars. And so it's just smarter at this point to just sit tight and wait for this to be all over. But as the Russian forces get here, it's getting scarier. But like I said, not the Russians. Okay, I'm not worried about the Russians at all. On the contrary, it's the local forces that are freaking out. And by the way, I'm sure that you guys discussed it. The videos that have come out of the abuse of POWs.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you, gentlemen, and if you'll indulge me and the chat won't mind, if you repeat it, I've heard that the Chinese in particular are outraged by that.
They are, yeah, absolutely. It's all over the Chinese media. It's all over the Indian media as well, by the way. It's been shown all around the world. Of course, the people who don't discuss it at all, I talk about Britain because this is where I live. I haven't seen any discussion of it in the British media whatsoever, and I find that extremely disturbing. Can I just say, Gonzalo, please be careful.
Don't worry.
I will also say this, and I just pass on not my advice, but the chief of operations of the Russian General Staff. He did say in that briefing he gave a few days ago that if you find yourself in a war zone, then please stay indoors.
Yeah.
He did say that.
Yeah, that's the most sensible thing to do at this time. Just to sit tight and wait for literally the cavalry to show up. But it's really interesting. In the West, they're not playing these atrocities up at all. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. I mean, it says it's in Britain. People don't know about them because, as I said, they're not being shown here. Of course, if you go onto social media, which of course a lot of people do, then it is different. Then people do see them, and you get some commentary there. But the big media here don't tell us anything. If you want to know what the big media were talking about over the weekend, and this will give you some idea of how unreal commentary about the war in Britain has become. There was a Ukrainian official who was interviewed on British BBC radio early in the morning on Saturday. He said that the Ukrainian army is about to recapture Kherson. And we spent the entire weekend learning about the great battle for Kherson until, of course, we stopped hearing about it. I mean, it was very odd. I mean, but that was the discussion. I mean, I was, reading, all kinds of fevered stories in the Daily Telegraph about how Kherson was about to be recaptured. And I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything that isn't correct. I gather that there was absolutely no actual fighting, that this entire Ukrainian counteroffensive that the British media got so excited about was just an exercise in, well, people's imagination, basically. I mean, it had no reality. But that's what we're reading about here. We're not reading in our newspapers, seeing on television, hearing on the radio about videos like that. Nor, by the way, you probably have seen them as well. At the very start of this program, I was saying that I've been going through a whole lot of videos of what is currently happening as we speak to the Ukrainian army in Donbass. And I mean, there were absolutely horrifying pictures of utterly devastated, obliterated Ukrainian fortifications, of settlements where the Ukrainian army had been obliterated and strewn with corpses of Ukrainian soldiers. It reminded me, as I said, of old photos I've seen of Passchendaele, which is one of the major battlegrounds of the First World War, and of the Battle of the Somme and things like that. It was on that kind of scale, and I have to say, it made me extremely upset and very, very angry that this war is being continued. And these people, many of whom, politically, I may have all kinds of disagreements with them, but one should not sacrifice the lives of people in that kind of way, in a cause which, as far as I can see, is hopeless now.
Do you guys see that super chat?
It's completely hopeless. I mean, in terms of. There is hello, or am I still there?
Yeah, we're listening to you. I've just put a super chat because it's
okay.
It's I don't want to say connected. It's about you
yes,
as well.
I've just seen it, and please be careful, Gonzalo. Do please be careful. We do not want your appearing on our programs to put you in any kind of jeopardy.
Oh no. But what's I mean, some stories that are percolating are kind of horrifying because, well, desperate people start doing desperate things and they lash out in frustration and fear of their own. And so it's understandable. It's not excusable, of course, but it's understandable. Yeah. But insofar as the situation here on the ground, I'm obviously in an area that is not under fire, but the air is frightening. I have to say, I've never been in a situation in my life where the air itself feels black. I mean, like, I'm a fairly rational individual, as you both know, and Chad knows. But I have to say that the vibe, the spirit, the flavor of the air is like something horrible is in the air, and so it's quite the experience. I'll tell you that right now. But I'm sorry, I'm a little bit out of sorts today, and if I sound kind of stupid, it's because my brain is going in a million directions at once. So you'll have to forgive me.
Well, of course we forgive. We don't forgive you. We are very honored to have you on our program, but we are concerned about you, Gonzalo, always.
Oh no, I know. I mean, where I am, I think is fairly secure, and so I'm okay.
Can I ask you a question, Gonzalo?
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know if you can answer this. Are humanitarian corridors being set up in Kharkiv, or do you know?
I don't know of any. I'm sort of like keeping on the line. The problem is that when you try to leave, the local forces they try to rob you. They demand a bribe for you to pass through their checkpoint. And if you don't give them what they want, they just start strip searching you and looking for anything of value, and so that becomes an issue. The rumors I'm hearing so far is that you have to pay between $200 and $500 or euros, cash, of course. They don't take credit cards, and that's per person. And there are as between 1 and 3 checkpoints before you get to the Russian side, and this is the roads. Okay, and the problem I'm hearing from several people is that they're stealing from people who are trying to go down this, or they're shooting at them, and so it's not clear if they're shooting at them for sure. This is the rumor. Okay, and so frankly I don't want to find out. So it's very unnerving in that regard. I've heard some crazy stories of someone saying that you needed $35,000 to cross the border. That's not true. It's between, like I said, between $200 and $500 per person per checkpoint. Okay, and that seems to be the going rate. Okay, enough that people can pass around that number. But yeah. So what I understand too is the site of those torture of the POWs was a location about 24 kilometers from the center of Kharkov. I'm pretty much near the center of Kharkov. And so 25 kilometers to the southeast of the city in a milk factory. And it's been like multiple, you know how the online, there are lots of people who are just have a lot of time on their hands and they're very meticulous. And so multiple people have independently found the same location. So it's definitely that place. And that place is definitely controlled by the local forces, the Zelensky regime forces. And so there's no question about the authenticity of that video. And there seems to have been a mild effort to disprove it and claim that it's fake. But online, that effort seems to have failed. And so what you're telling me, Alexander, is that they're basically suppressing the news in the West.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the things like that are not being reported here to any extent. I mean, obviously there are people who know about them, but then I mean, you won't see. It won't be the big story as it ought to be. I mean, this is the kind of terrible thing that ought to be leading the news. Well, it's not even appearing in the news.
Yeah, and from what I understand in Russia, I've been in touch with some journalists in Russia and some other people there. And they all tell me, and not necessarily not Russian media or pro Putin or pro Russia, but just observers. They're telling me that these videos have had an enormous stiffening impact insofar as the will of the Russian people. Absolutely. And I would suspect that these videos have been shown or have been seen by the troops, the Russian troops. And so, you're basically creating a condition of no quarter given, Absolutely. No quarter, demanded. And so this might get really, really ugly. I mean, I think that this is a disaster because I think that the fighting will be even more brutal than ever because I think that the Russians will think, justifiably or not, that shoot first and ask questions never kind of approach insofar as fighting is concerned.
Yeah, I'm afraid I completely agree with you, which is precisely why rules about treatment of prisoners exist. It's partly intended to prevent things like this, but of course, in this instance, or we see how those rules have completely broken down.
I'm also thinking. I started listening to you guys just as you were talking about the future of Ukraine. I think the catastrophe that we're going to have in Ukraine is that the best people have left, the most educated, the smartest, and they're going to settle into Western Europe quite nicely because they will be able to adapt because they're more educated. And I doubt if those people will ever return to Ukraine. I think that Ukraine will become a husk of a nation. I mean, the flower of Ukraine will leave or will be killed in this pointless war.
I completely agree with that. I'm afraid. I mean, this is a terrible outcome, but I'm afraid I completely agree with you. I think that this is exactly where we're heading.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to pop in and just say hello. And I'm sorry if my participation today has not been particularly good, but I have to admit that today has been a rather difficult day because it's quite frightening here. I mean, nothing specific has happened, but it is quite frightening. So anyway.
Yes.
We're all worried about you.
We are all very worried about you, Gonzalo. Yeah, absolutely. Please keep
outside of that
careful as you can, and we think about you a lot and all the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Gonzalo,
much.
Stay safe.
And Alex, I just want to ask you a favor, if you wouldn't mind terribly. I've been in touch with a couple of really extraordinary people to do live streams with, but of course I can't do that because I only have my phone. And I wanted to talk to you later via email if we can set up some times to do these interviews, because they're with really extraordinary people to talk about the issue of the biolabs. The biolabs that I think is a really, really big story, and I think it's something that we should all focus on.
Yeah, just send me an email, and you want me to stream it from my PC, so you can do it. Yeah, just send me an email, and we'll set it up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Guys,
Can
thank
I
you so much.
can I
Go
just
ahead.
quickly, whilst I've got you there, on a housekeeping matter, did you get in touch with Scott Ritter?
Well, he hasn't gotten in touch with me.
No, it
I'm
doesn't
sorry.
surprise me.
I hate to
He's
say this
incredibly
public.
slow. I will try and jog him,
Okay.
but I mean
Okay. Yeah,
he
because
does know
I
that you're interested. I mean,
yeah,
so
I'd be
I
delighted
will
in
be
talking
having
to him.
him.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing
Absolutely.
is, see, the things I've been seeing on the ground here, I very much need to speak to a military man
Yeah, I know.
or somebody who has experience in such matters, because
Yes.
I can't make heads or
Yes.
tails of it.
Yes.
And so it's I can repeat what I've seen, but I can't make any kind of analysis as to what it means. And so that's
Yes.
why it'd be great to talk to him.
No, I
Yeah.
understand. I
Yeah.
understand that. I'm going to try and speak to him later today, actually, or at least
Okay.
contact him later today, and we'll see what we can arrange.
Sounds
Look,
good.
Gonzalo, I too
Guys.
have to go. I'm
okay,
under
let's,
some time
yeah.
pressure. But what I wanted to say is thank you for joining us again. Your contributions are invaluable, but not so invaluable that we don't worry even more about your well-being. And what
Thank
you've
you.
just told us makes it even more pressing that you look after yourself and take care.
Yeah. Thank you
Counter
very much.
narrative
Thank
says,
you.
"Stay safe, Gonzalo." From the
Thank you.
chats.
Thank you very
Stay
much.
safe,
And
Gonzalo.
chat, take it easy. Okay. All
Take
the
care,
best, guys.
Gonzalo.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. All right, Alexander, you have to go as well.
Pretty much. Do we have many more? If not,
No, let me just read them out. Lee, thank you for that super chat.
Yeah.
Shifty Russian says, "Love your work. When do you think military operations will end? Who will pay for the cleanup?"
I'm going to give this is just a guess. I think we're going to see the whole of April. There'll be operations, but I think by the end of April it'll be pretty much decided.
And Russia will pay for it, I imagine. Yeah.
Who else?
Yeah. Russia, China, they'll build it up.
Russia,
Lee,
China. Yeah.
Lee Vanderhuden, thank you very much for that super chat. Let's see. Yoav Bressler, thank you for that super chat. Constantine says Tucker Carlson should show that video. That's 30 million viewers. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What if LK says, what if Russia returned Polish and Hungarian lands back to them? It would satisfy the Ukrainians who live there because they want to be in Europe, and it would divide NATO.
It's a thing. It's an idea that has floated around and tantalized all sorts of people.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Farrell says, awesome super chat. Farrell says, I put it up there. Bild reported the video in Germany. Gonzalo, please stay safe in the basement with your supplies and avoid all interaction with the Ukrainians. You are in peril. Well said, Farrell. Definitely. WD, Farrell, thank you for that super chat. Raphael says, oh, Alexander, brother, will you pay homage to the lady who puts the financial systems together in Russia? I remember you were asking her to be more open. I imagine Nabelina.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I will say this, and I absolutely do. I have been very critical of Nabelina in the past. I thought that she pursued far too stringent and tough a monetary policy in the period after the 2014-2015 crisis, but her performance over the last few weeks has been absolutely outstanding. And I mean, she's absolutely fulfilled the role. I mean, she has been an outstanding central banker.
All right, a few more, and we'll wrap it up. PRG54, thank you for that super sticker. Grimzone says, I don't think most of these political labels are at all useful. They distract from the material substance and imply mutual exclusivity to ideas and positions. You all don't dwell too much on them. Thank you.
I mean, I take that point. Sometimes we have to use labels in order to make it clear whom we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that super chat. Constantine, thank you for that super chat. WD First Roy, thank you for that super chat as well. And Hunger, the Die Merchant said, I disagree. This is an existential conflict for our elites. They cannot maintain the international liberal order if Russia succeeds. The worth of an American promise will be forever compromised. That
is a very, very interesting point, actually. Okay, I'm going to sort of think about that one, and I think you may be onto something there. Absolutely.
It's true, absolutely. Raul Pinto says, Gonzalo, you are in my prayers, brother. Be blessed and stay safe. And Kurt says, I was of the impression that the Russians' lost numbers include also Donbass and Chechens who are fighting on the Russian side. Do you agree?
Initially, I thought that the figures that the Russians gave, which were 1,300 dead, this is last week, were in fact purely for the Russian army, but now I have been told otherwise, and that it is in fact a global total. That it's the Russian army, the Chechens, and
I heard
the DL.
That's
DPL,
what I heard.
LPL.
Yeah, I agree. I heard it's a global. Counter narrative says, "Stay safe, Gonzalo." Jane, thank you for that super sticker. Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Sharon, welcome to the Duran community. J.K. Wynn says War Stories was 4-part documentary on Eisendgruppen. Europe has complex history. I've always been interested in history, and knowing it helps with nuance of present.
You are absolutely right. Look, I'm not a military person, as I've said so often, but the fact that I've had some training in history undoubtedly has helped me understand this whole situation much better than people who don't seem to be interested in history seem able to do.
All right, the final 2 super chats is Sparky. Americans were once seen by the world as an arrogant and sort of benign positive and can do away, but nowadays our government is arrogant in a pathetic way.
I remember that so well. I can just quickly mention this. I remember the Americans from the 60s, how we used to see them then, and we saw them as exuberant, loud, sometimes, rather over the top, but, they were vital and they were also impressive. Now, they're arrogant, but they're no longer impressive. On the contrary, they're frankly annoying and even, well, they provoke.
You mean the political class?
No, I mean the political class.
Yeah.
I mean the absolute political class. I mean, I remember LBJ, for example. I remember what LBJ was like. People always used to ridicule him a lot in Europe, but at the same time, people took him very, very seriously. Nobody takes Biden seriously. Yeah. Not even the political class here. I think they're dismayed by him.
All right, and the final super chat, Alexander, is from Pink Flamingo. Salud, love the show. How can I know that you are neutral and not sponsored by Russia? How can we work for exposing the war crimes of the fascist Ukrainian battalions? I saw the video of the POW being tortured.
There's a very simple way. You could just go to our records. They're all public, and you will find that we don't get so much as a brass farthing from any official source in Russia. So
not only Russia, any government,
place,
not even the Greek government or the Cypriot government.
Or the Cypriot government.
No, I'll leave it on this note. Alexander, my father told me the other day, he said, you're going around Athens and you're filming Athens and you're showing Athens. How come the Greek tourism board doesn't pay you anything? And I said, well,
there you go.
Nice.
There we go. We rely entirely on you, our viewers. Yeah. I mean, we have no other resource but you. That, of course, puts an enormous obligation on us, because we've got to make sure that we provide you with reliable information, good analysis, proper, interconnect with you. But you are our resource, and you are our reason for existence. Exactly. And that's all there is to say.
There was a time a long time ago when we used to sell flashlights. We used to sponsor flashlights. We stopped that as well.
We stopped that.
So it's 100%.
Even though they were very good flashlights.
They were very good. Yeah, absolutely, very good. Do you have 1 second so I can read you a quote? Or
okay. Read me.
What's because this came from and we've done many videos with regards to this gentleman from the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Nikolai Patrushev.
Yeah.
Okay, said that Russia is contemplating the collection of evidence on the military biological activities of the United States in Ukraine, and that the civilized world will see how the states continue the traditions of the Third Reich with its inhumane experiments on people. According to Patrushev, the emergence of new centers of world development caused growing dissatisfaction with the United States. They sought to maintain their hegemony by any means and unleashed wars in other regions of the planet: Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. Quote, now that the American external debt has exceeded $30 trillion, America has begun to push humanity towards a global catastrophe.
Wow. Okay.
He's important, Patrushev.
He's a very important man. He's one of the most powerful people in Russia. He's not well known, not as well known as, say, Lavrov is, but he is absolutely a very, very powerful person indeed, and a very interesting man.
His comments
very
carry
clever
weight.
Man. Yeah, his comments carry a great deal of weight.
Okay. Eugene says, final super chat, it was less than a year ago that ex-military generals in France threatened a coup against Macron. Keep this in mind after the election, plus instability that will inevitably arise due to Russia sanctions.
That's a very good point, actually.
Very good point. And we started with France, and so we end with that point about France. Thank you to our moderators, Valley SGEC, Lady Cosmica, who else? Alan Watson. Did I miss anybody? Reckless Abandon was in the house as well.
Yeah.
And I think I got everybody. Alexander, I know you have to run. Thank you to our moderators. You're the best, Moro. Thank you for that super chat. Thank you to everybody on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, and of course our amazing, awesome locals chat. The locals chat today was on fire.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Any final words before we sign off?
Well,
Final
it is a darkening picture on all sides. To be straightforward about this, I hope this war ends soon. I hope it ends diplomatically, but I'm very much afraid that it won't. And we're going to have some very, very difficult times. The other thing to do is look at the United States, watch what happens in the congressional elections, watch what Donald Trump is doing. I notice that he's now saying more interesting things. Finally, I mean, he said that Biden was worse than all the previous 5 worst presidents put together, which I agree with, by the way. So let's just see what happens in the United States, because if there's going to be a turn, that's where it must come.
Yeah, I agree. Only from the United States is this thing going to wind down.
Mm.
All right, we'll leave it there. Take care, everybody, and keep an eye out for Alexander's video. That's going to be up in the next hour.
Yeah.
Take care.